Cardinal Virtues, War of the Submarine, Book 1. Written by R.G. Roberts. Narrated by A.J. Shuck. Part 2. Honesty. 9. On the Brink. 6 April 2038. Two lonely plastic-wrapped crates stood separate from the 100-plus pallets unloaded from MV Calliope, tucked off to the side as if forgotten. The two crates' shipping labels were orange instead of blue, and they lacked a triangle-shaped stamp, unlike the bulk of Calliope's loadout. The 900-foot-long container ship moored to port side on Pier 4, Berth 1 of Armistice Station's transportation platform 7. The four piers stuck out like spindles from the round transplat, which sported a helicopter landing pad, a small communications shack, and a double-sided elevator bank. Buoys marked the approaches to the platform, and 7 identical transplats lay in the distance, most visible on a clear day. Armistice Station was the only underwater habitat in the world with over 4 such platforms, and hers covered almost 2 square nautical miles, 3 times that of her counterparts. Armistice Station billed itself a beacon of free enterprise and human ingenuity. You could buy and sell anything on Armistice Station. Gamble, seek companionship, see the latest shows, or even ride an underwater roller coaster. Forgiving station regulations made it a waypoint for an enormous amount of freight and passenger traffic, too. Occupying prime real estate in the middle of the Indian Ocean meant Armistice Station's GSP, or gross station product, was higher than that of many small nations. You missed these two. Damien Richelieu, a tall, swarthy man dressed in black, pointed at the 2 orange-labeled crates. Sir? Calliope's logistics officer fidgeted. They're not on my manifest. The logistics officer's eyes went wide. He was taller than Damien, but Damien looked like he owned a private gym or 2. The logistics officer gulped. Those are a private delivery, Mr. Richelieu. Are they? Storm clouds gathered in Damien's gray eyes, making the officer stumble a step backwards. Ways, spelled W-A-A-S, paid for your cargo. Not all of it. Damien glowered. The officer crept back another step, and Francis Bradshaw sighed from his spot near the head of the pier. Time to save the poor fool. Story of my life. Not that he'd have it any other way. Francis Bradshaw liked to think of himself as an entrepreneur, albeit on a limited scale. He was unremarkable looking, skinny, shorter than average, and with dark hair and freckles he wished he'd grow out of since they made him look about 12. Unfortunately, by age 26, they were there to stay. They're my shipment. Sorry. He breezed forward, one hand held out in welcome. I didn't realize Waze had stuff on Calliope. It's damn hard for any company to miss Waze. Damien crossed his arms, ignoring Bradshaw's hand. He felt his smile go wooden. Waze, or the Worldwide Acquisition and Services Group, was a relative newcomer to international commerce, founded in 2034 by a group of people whose underwater get-rich-quick schemes worked out far too well. New or not, Waze was a powerhouse. Its cargoes only amounted to 5% shipped on the high seas, but the company owned 60% of the cargo traveling to and from underwater stations, not to mention the 17, or was it 18, minor underwater stations Waze owned outright. Armistice Station was too big for Waze to spread its influence too far, but they still owned a significant piece of the pie. The rush to the ocean floor opened up undersea commerce in a big way. To realtors, miners, shipping companies, undersea farming, and even your average mom-and-pop business with a bit of extra cash. Advances in technology meant farming, mining, and even living underwater was cheaper and easier than ever, and the late 2020s saw a boom in ocean floor business. Armistice Station was the biggest undersea station in the world, but there were hundreds more, all with their own unique flavor. I'm not a company. Bradshaw held his hands up, trying to look innocent. Just a guy who ships stuff in for friends. Friends? Damien made the word sound so dirty. Yeah, Bradshaw shrugged. He didn't need to explain himself to this guy, but he did need to end this conversation in a hurry and get back to work. Thank goodness he left his stupid uniform behind. I don't buy anything of your caliber, mostly cheap stuff, not the cool imports. Everyone knew that Ways sold the stuff you couldn't get elsewhere. Stuff that wasn't legal in most countries, particularly the States. Extra risque porn, vape pods of questionable legality, recreational substances. Underwater stations in international waters had few restrictions, and Ways was the biggest seller. It was one reason tourists flocked to Armistice Station. That, and the lure of the world's biggest underwater habitat, casino, amusement park, and undersea mining area all rolled into one spider-like blob on the ocean floor. Problem was, Bradshaw sold the same stuff, to a much more limited audience. Right, Damien drawled. Then he turned back to the orange-labeled crates. Shouldn't be a problem to open them up then, right? What? Bradshaw caught his breath. I mean, yeah, we could, but it'd be a copper-plated bitch to repack, and I've got to get back to work. Technically, he was already late, but Calliope's crew sucked at keeping to schedules. I should have asked for leave today. Too late for that thought. Unless he could text Lieutenant Lin and ask for some special liberty. Ask me if I care. Damien's smile was wolfish and sent a chill down Bradshaw's spine. Isn't a little guy like me beneath your notice? Bradshaw tried not to squirm. Showing the local Ways bully that those crates were full of restricted adult videos and Cherry Plus vape pods wasn't smart. If anyone from back home asked Bradshaw what that plus was, he'd play dumb. Damien would know, however. Ways sold the same products at twice the price he hawked them for. Of course not. Damien loomed forward. The logistics officer fled. Nothing's beneath Ways' notice. He smiled coldly, walking over to Bradshaw's precious crates, including import fees. I paid those already. Bradshaw tried not to swallow. Importing goods onto Armistice Station cost a decent chunk of change, more than he wanted to pay. But smuggling was the one thing frowned upon in this place. Yeah? Damien tore the orange labels right off. Prove it. You can't do that. Do what? Damien shot him a grin, and then turned to shout at two of the station's receiving agents. Hey boys, we've got a smuggler here. What? No! Bradshaw turned to the station employees, one of which he knew well. Yvette Thayer had been on Armistice Station 2 years longer than Bradshaw, and they played in the same poker league. Yvette, dude, you know I'm not... You got your manifests, Franny? She asked, peering at the crates. Damien didn't even bother to hide the orange labels crumpled up in his left hand. He took them. Bradshaw hated that stupid nickname. An idiot in their poker league stuck Franny on him a year ago, and it stuck like a bad smell. Yvette glanced at Damien, who smirked. I don't see nothing, she shrugged. You know that means we've got to impound your shipment and take you in. I know that means Ways pays you off, yeah. Sighing, Bradshaw threw one last look at the crates. He might get them back if he paid the fines fast enough, but the station probably auctioned them off to the highest bidder, which would be Ways, as usual. Come on, Yvette said. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I don't want to cuff you or anything. He groaned. Fine, let's just get it over with. Yvette led the way off the platform. Bradshaw managed not to look back at Damien Richelieu's gloating face, but he did hear the crates pried open. Shit. How was he going to explain this to the dozen people he promised Cherry Plus to? The television in USS Fletcher's wardroom showed the Armed Forces News Network, which usually featured silly, feel-good pieces about life in the Navy. The fluff felt a little more alien these days, what with tensions rising in the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. But that only meant AFN doubled down on the specials about uniform changes or haircut regulations. But a satellite uplink to local news channels was hard to get when your ship pounded across the ocean at 25 knots, covering 600 nautical miles every day, and AFN was always available. AFN also poached news from a variety of sources, through which those who endured the optimistic crap could catch up on world news. This snippet sounded like it was borrowed from the BBC. The anchor was better dressed and better spoken than her American counterparts. Today, the United States vetoed a resolution from the rest of the United Nations Security Council. The proposed resolution was backed by all member states of the Security Council, including 3 of the 4 other permanent members, China, France, and Russia. The UK abstained from the vote. The proposed resolution condemned the United States for meddling in the growing Chinese Civil War with surprisingly strong language. As most viewers know, tensions between the two Chinas escalated 2 weeks ago when the People's Republic of China claimed that Taiwan provided assistance to North Korean forces in capturing 2 underwater stations claimed by China. Taiwan's vehement denial of the charges ended in the Battle of the Formosa Strait, where an attempted amphibious attack on Taiwan ended in a bloody stalemate. The United States immediately moved to aid Taiwan, leading to the current standoff in the Security Council. This seems to be yet another flashpoint in an already troubled region. Skirmishes in the Indian Ocean and South China Sea continue, with loss of life and property damage mounting. Commander Nancy Coleman, commanding officer of USS Fletcher, looked away from the television on Fletcher's starboard wall. She was a good-looking woman, with long brown hair and sharp green eyes. Nancy was the kind of captain who radiated strength. She was a steady and practical sort, with a strong sense of fairness her crew loved. She was alone in the wardroom until her operations officer, Lieutenant Viola Hawkins, walked in. Viola was a short woman, built like a barrel and twice as tough. Nancy could almost look her in the eye while seated. "What is it, Viola?" "There's been a skirmish near Diego Garcia." Viola chewed her lip. "The Indian Navy fired on Sam Nunn and Spruance." "What?" Nancy came out of her chair so fast she almost fell down, dropping the romance novel she was reading between news segments. "Both took damage. Spruance has a fire amidships, but it's under control. Sam Nunn damaged an Indian destroyer before everyone withdrew." Hand shaking, Viola extended the classified message tablet. Nancy took the tablet automatically. Her hands felt cold. Spruance and Sam Nunn were Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. They were 500 feet of pure warfighting power, equipped with a high-powered phased-array radar, 96 vertical launch cells for missiles, torpedoes, and a 5-inch gun. Arleigh Burkes were the Swiss Army knives of the U.S. Navy, capable of shooting down ballistic missiles, sending tomahawks ashore, defending an aircraft carrier, or even duking it out with other surface ships or submarines. But they'd never fired a shot in anger at another warship. Until now. The message didn't say much, other than reiterating India's demand that the United States and United Kingdom evacuate the base at Diego Garcia. India was the region's biggest supporter of independence for the Chagos archipelago, but the UK thus far refused to leave. "Shit," she whispered. "This is not what we need right now." "No kidding, ma'am," Viola grimaced. "We're rushing to defend Taiwan, and now we're shooting at the Indians? We better hope that blows over." "The Navy isn't what it used to be," Nancy didn't add. The U.S. Navy was still big and mean, but they weren't alone. Exploiting undersea resources meant nations like India, France, and Russia had a lot more money to burn, and they spent it on ships and submarines. Newer ones. She shook her head. "No one wants a war. Even if we aren't the meanest kids on the block these days." Viola fidgeted. You sure that applies to China, Captain? China versus Taiwan's been brewing for decades, Nancy shrugged to cover her racing heart. 10 years ago, it looked like China and Taiwan might come to a peaceful agreement. But revenue from ocean floor mining gave Taiwan the money to stand up to their larger neighbor, and suddenly the game changed. The Indian Ocean and South China Sea were rich in both tapped and untapped resources, and thus particularly volatile. Everyone in the Navy knew war would come. It was only a matter of time. Yeah, and we're stuck in the middle, Viola replied. Nancy grimaced but didn't comment. Her opinion didn't matter. What mattered was that the U.S. Navy would stand shoulder to shoulder with their Taiwanese brethren, just as they had for decades, even if it meant threatening the Indians along the way. There were times Nancy hated this job. Any new orders from Enterprise? She asked. Fletcher was running point for the Enterprise strike group. The carrier and her other escorts, 2 other destroyers and a cruiser, steamed 10 miles behind Fletcher. Rumor said the Tripoli Expeditionary Strike Group would join them soon, but Tripoli and her escorts were down near Australia and would need more time to arrive. Meanwhile, Enterprise turned and burned to meet up with the USS Gerald R. Ford Strike Group, based in Japan and a lot closer to the South China Sea than the Northern Arabian Gulf deployment Nancy's crew departed on 2 months earlier. Just to watch for submarines. Admiral McNally's flown a dozen messages asking for an attack sub to join up with us, but so far, no dice. Crap time for Missouri to bend a screw, yeah? Some people said Missouri's captain exaggerated the damage to get away from Admiral McNally's micromanaging. Rear Admiral Jeff McNally was a submariner, not a surface warfare officer. He didn't know jack about deploying destroyers, and it showed. His chief of staff, the number 2 guy at the strike group, was also a submariner, but at least he knew what he didn't know, and at least the pair generally concentrated on making Missouri miserable, not Fletcher. So far. Nancy suppressed a grimace, glaring at the blue wardroom tabletop. Not having a sub along opened the strike group up to the threat of enemy submarines, and no surface officer in their right mind liked that, even in pseudo-peacetime. She knew more about submarine operations than most of her brethren. It came from being married to a submariner, and not having Missouri along made her uneasy. Worse yet, Fletcher wasn't an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. She was the 14th ship of the newer O'Bannon class. But in this case, newer didn't mean better. Designed to be built quicker than their older counterparts, Fletcher and her sisters lacked a towed sonar array. Their onboard sonar worked well enough at short range and low speeds, but racing along like this left Fletcher deaf. Only a submariner would stick Fletcher on point and keep both Arleigh Burkes in close. I'll be in CIC if you need me, ma'am, Viola said. Nancy looked up. Twitchy, are we? A little. Me too, a captain couldn't say. Not one who'd been in command for only 4 months. Nancy had to look calm and confident. Appearing that way while making sense out of an idiot admiral's orders was hard. But this wasn't Nancy's first time working for a moron. Surface warfare officers were experts at getting the job done with too few resources. She'd manage. Bradshaw's in the slammer again. The text gleamed on his screen, cheerfully unaware of the trouble it caused, already awaiting him when Alex got back from the pool. He groaned, not even bothering to muffle the sound. No one here knew him. He was just one more guy in a locker room that held 100 on a slow day. No need for the image of the perfect naval officer here. Besides, Alex felt like he ran his command by cell phone, even underwater. Command. Yeah, it even came with the fancy title of Officer in Charge, Naval Detachment, Armistice Station. But this was the only command he'd ever get, thanks to Chris Kennedy. In charge of a team of 5 officers in a sea of thousands of civilians, stuck on a station that had a hate-on for the U.S. Navy in particular. Joy. It's too easy to do the right thing, Staff Sergeant Walters said back at the Wick, when Alex was young and impressionable. But no one talked about the consequences, did they? Alex shook himself and closed his gym locker. Bitterness was pointless. So, he sighed, tied his shoes, and picked up his phone. He hit the dial button as he rose from the locker room bench and waited for the person on the other end to pick up. What'd Bradshaw do now? Sounds like smuggling, again. Lieutenant Commander Stephanie Gomez replied. Alex could almost hear her rolling her eyes. Steph was the second-ranking member at his tiny command, billeted as the detachment's operations officer, but also dual-hatted as Alex's unofficial XO. Fucking fantabulous. Where's Jesse? Alex headed out of Sequest Fitness's locker room. This was what he got for going for a swim during lunch. On the phone trying to unfuck the store's loadout for Medgar Evers? I thought they were underway an hour ago. Alex exited the fitness center, entering a domed walkway that wouldn't seem out of place in some stateside mall. Its name was Newell Tube, and only the blue tint of the lighting hinted that they were underwater. Dodging a pair of tourists, Alex hung a right and headed towards the nearest outer tube joiner or station. Tubes were the station's walkways, all named for famous ocean explorers, lined with shops, entertainment venues, and airlocks. The outer tubes, however, were outside the station. Their cars traveled on a track sheltered by a flexible housing that looked like a playground tunnel. Those tunnels looped around the station, forming a multi-lined underwater high-speed rail. The line at the Newell station was 50 deep. Alex grimaced and bypassed it. Walking back towards the station's center would take forever, particularly at the height of tourist season. Back when he was a tourist, he hadn't known ways around the crowds, but after months on the station, Alex knew every shortcut. They got delayed when some French frigate poached their vegetable loadout, Steph said. Today's a great day, huh? Alex asked. Jesse looks like he's going to be done anytime soon. Not unless he bribes the station manager. Steph's snort was audible, and we all know how much Madame Ledoux loves the U.S. Navy. Hey, at least she likes you more than she does me. Alex slipped between two street vendors, one hawking earrings and the other stuffed animals. He was half tempted to pick up one of those overpriced and glittery dolphins, but his daughters were too old. Jessie's the only one she likes, sir. True. Alex headed up Picard Tube, resolutely not wondering if his supply officer had bribed the station manager. They probably had the budget for it, but the U.S. government got weird about things like that. Lieutenant Jesse Lynn was a perpetual smiler, good at making friends, so he probably hadn't bribed anyone. Not that it would be a surprise in this place. Jesse was also logistics specialist second-class Bradshaw's direct superior, making him the doubly logical choice for this job. Alas, Jesse was unavailable. I'll go fetch our miscreant child, Alex said, slipping into line for the outer tube at Picard. Most of that tube was under construction, and so the wait was much shorter. Hopefully that wasn't because the last car just departed, but that would be his luck, wouldn't it? The outer tubes didn't have a set schedule, but one showed up every 10 minutes. Outer tube joiners peppered the edges of the gigantic underwater station, and their cars followed multiple and confusing tracks. Locals mastered those within a few months. Tourists never did. Staff chuckled. Good luck, boss. Thanks, I think. Alex hung up and resisted the urge to slump into a nearby wall. Being the boss wasn't all perks. Armistice Station was a nice place to visit, doubly so with the amusement park open. But it was a crummy place to live, particularly with his wife at sea and his teenage daughters back home in Connecticut. Shore duty was meant to be a chance to spend time with your family, to recharge. So much for that. Alex could have resigned his commission when he was drop-kicked out of the submarine community, but he took his medicine, and here he was. Squaring his shoulders, Alex stepped into the outer tube car. This was his job, and he would do it. His phone rang again, making him jump. What's up, Steph? It wasn't like her to call back so quickly. Steph generally preferred to text. Message traffic just came in concerning the I.O. Peace and Cooperation Summit. It's back on again, starting in 3 days. Also thought you might want to know that they swapped out Admiral Wong Chai for Admiral Hamilton as senior Navy rep. Say what? 10. Change of plans. The outer tube ride to the brig was long enough for Alex to finish his call and start stewing. The Indian Ocean Peace and Cooperation Summit, known to the media as the Great Summit, had been cancelled twice in the last 2 weeks, the last time for good. But now it was back on, due to start in 3 goddamn days, all with his favorite admiral playing a major part. He was so screwed. First, however, he had a job to do. Getting into the brig required a special code, but one of the few useful perks of Alex's job was that he got administration codes for most parts of the station. There weren't guards like you'd see at a jail, just 3 layers of security systems that all required that same code. Once through the main doors, Alex faced the front desk, where 2 uniformed security specialists sat. Yvette Thayer was the senior of the pair this shift, which meant Alex didn't have to deal with the station manager. Small blessings. Yvette sat at the security desk near the station's small brig, playing with her phone. She was older than Alex, with dark skin and eyes, and liked to vape a pipe of something that smelled like peaches. Most importantly, Yvette was tolerant of miscreants like Bradshaw, and one of the nicest people on the station. Which meant she didn't hate the entire U.S. Navy for killing 15 people next door to the station 5 months ago. Telling anyone on Armistice Station that some mystery submarine shot 2 American torpedoes was a waste of time. Alex learned to live with the barbs. Hey, Yvette. He shoved his hands in his pockets. What's the damage this time? Smuggling fine. 3rd offense, so it's $600. Yvette replied and then arched an eyebrow. Beats killing people. Alex sighed. Can you release him to me? I'll make sure he pays. Normally no, but since we all know you Navy types can't leave, sure. She smiled. Besides, it's not Franny's fault he got mixed up with Waze. Waze? Really? Alex tried to steer clear of how station politics and money braided together into a great big ball of riches. He was here to look out for U.S. Navy interests, and because it was the last place he wanted to be, so naturally the first place Admiral Hamilton decided to send him. Yep, Yvette puffed her vape pipe. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. Sighing, Alex signed the release form, glancing around the little brig. It was probably the ugliest place on the station, all solid bars and drab grays, but even the waiting area had view screens to the outside sea. Both waiting benches were padded plastic and more comfortable than they looked. Settling in to wait for Bradshaw to saunter out of the cell, Alex crossed his ankles and pretended not to notice how every security worker other than Yvette ignored him. Hey, sir, Bradshaw grinned. Fancy meeting you here. Yeah, fancy that for the 5th time. Alex rose, shaking his head. The other 2 charges were drunk and disorderly, which, in fairness to Bradshaw, was more like disorderly at a poker game. The young petty officer didn't drink much, but he did love to gamble. Bradshaw's grin faded. I'll pay them before the end of the day, promise. Yeah, you'd better. Or I'm on the hook for it, and no fucking way am I explaining your bullshit to my wife. Could be fun. Alex snorted. Not as much as you think. She's an SWO, good with missiles and guns, and you have to salute her, too. Okay, I'll pass, Bradshaw smirked. Sir, you know, one of these days you're going to cause enough trouble to make me do something about it, Alex said. Come on, you know I'm worth my weight in gold. No one's as good at Armistice Station bullshit as I am. Bradshaw held the door open, and they walked through it together, heading for the nearest outer tube. Which is the reason I haven't kicked your ass out of the Navy yet. Bradshaw snickered like he knew the threat was hollow. And it was. The Navy kept an office on Armistice Station mainly to provide a local contact for ships passing through. By all rights, Alex's job should have been a supply officer's post. He mostly made sure ships and subs got the food and stores they ordered, and that sailors didn't trouble the locals. And then dealt with the inevitable fallout drunk or high sailors caused at local businesses, while visiting ships and subs dealt with their troublesome children. Unfortunately, pissing off Admiral Hamilton had its perks, including being stationed 300 feet underwater and 9,000 miles from home. He'd been drop-kicked out of the submarine community. 4 months into the new job, it still stung. "You need me to do anything for the summit, sir? Or should I shimmy back to my habitat and put a uniform on?" Bradshaw asked as they boarded the outer tube car. Alex cocked his head. "How'd you know it was back on?" "Little birdie told me," Bradshaw shrugged. "It's back on for Saturday, right? With Rear Admiral Hamilton and what's-his-name, the politician, coming?" "In 4 days." Keeping a professional face on was hard, and Alex gave up after a brief effort. How the fuck did he go from being on track to command a fast attack submarine to dealing out ice cream and playing junior concierge? If he never saw Admiral Hamilton again, it'd be too soon. Armistice Station wasn't big enough to hide from her. He was the senior representative of the US government, which meant the summit was his problem. Why the fuck couldn't they appoint an ambassador to this place? It's practically an independent nation. I'm not qualified for this bullshit. He shook himself. "Get changed and head to the office," Alex said. "I've got to go talk to Madame Ledoux about security arrangements." Bradshaw didn't need to be told twice before vanishing. Alex, however, headed to the Naval Detachment office first. He was so glad to be rid of that mess when it was cancelled. First, India refused to attend. Then France took issue with the security arrangements. The United States stood on ceremony and refused to send a delegation of less than 15. Australia wasn't invited initially and was mortally offended, while China refused to be in the same room as Taiwan. Then the French killed the whole thing a second time by bringing up the Kansas incident and torquing the US president off. Now it looked like everyone except the belligerents would attend. But wait, that wasn't true. India and the US shot at one another just that morning. This was going to go over as well as shit on a shingle. Barracuda departed Saint-Denis-Réunion in the dead of night. Saint-Denis was the capital of the French overseas region in the Indian Ocean, a hub that grew more important with each passing day. The meat of France's undersea empire was based in the Mediterranean, but her Indian Ocean holdings were nothing to laugh at. While other European powers decolonized in the mid-20th century, France quietly held on to multiple islands off Africa's east coast, and from those islands spawned dozens of undersea stations. Technological developments allowing for easy and safe ocean floor exploitation made all those stations rich. Now, French naval and commercial power reached a higher peak than the days of Napoleon. That point of national pride did nothing to improve Jules Rochambeau's mood. "This is foolishness," he said to his new first officer, Commander Camille Dubois. Camille simply smiled. "Think of your reputation should you be able to pull it off." "Mais non, flattery will get you nowhere." Jules sat back in his chair with a huff. "I am a submarine commander, not an infantryman." "Infantrymen would poke holes in precious bulkheads, mon capitaine." Her smile turned thin. "Surely they do not expect you to run around shooting like some action hero." Jules shook his head. "Of course not. Admiral Bernard is not an idiot." Then he glared. "Which is what you want me to admit." "Oui." She did not bother trying to look innocent. "Do you disagree with the objective?" "No," he sighed. "I'm not certain how I feel about supporting China in their civil war. Their territorial ambitions will turn outwards once they defeat Taiwan. But if hegemony is our goal, it must start with Armistice Station." And it would not hurt to return to the site of your greatest victory, no? Her eyes gleamed. That was not a victory, Jules scowled. He cared little for the civilians killed in the Nake 4. Collateral damage was inescapable, even in a shadow war. He followed orders, which was enough for his conscience. What he disliked was the secrecy of it all. Jules wanted to defeat his nation's enemies openly, and he wanted credit for it. Humiliating our American friends is always a victory. I found my own part in it quite sweet. Jules found Camille a cold fish. He respected her, otherwise he would not have accepted her as his second-in-command. But his blood ran hotter. Camille was competent, but tricky, as dangerous as a domesticated panther. Perhaps that is good. I might bet her if she frightened me less, or if I thought she wouldn't betray me if it suited her. That thought made him smile. Alas, we have our orders, he shrugged. I will follow them, even if I would prefer to visit a different type of humiliation upon the Americans. A wolfish grin, such as in the Strait of Malacca. Our Indian friends would not take kindly to that, she said. It might also lead to war. No one wants war. Jules waved a hand. Not a real one. We simply want the Americans to stop meddling in our hemisphere. Once they see that they are no longer the world's superpower, they will retreat. If the chaos I witnessed on Kansas is any indication, they will not do it well. Camille seemed pleased by this. Another shrug. Quel dommage. Such a pity. 2 hours later, after a long time in an uncomfortable waiting area, and more fretting than he liked to admit, Alex reached the station administrator. Ada Ledoux's job was like being an unelected mayor on steroids. Armistice Station was in international waters and independent, governed only by station regulations and international law. 3,000 people lived and worked on the station, with as many as 6 times that in transient visitors on any given day. Madame Ledoux was a busy woman, and Alex rarely saw her unless an American sailor did something stupid. He never enjoyed their conversations. Commander Coleman, I cannot give your people further access to the security systems, she said, not rising from the chair behind her desk. Her office windows went from floor to ceiling, and although their thickness distorted the seascape slightly, the view remained breathtaking. If I give it to you, there are 6 other countries that will demand the same. We don't have the bandwidth. Alex pasted on a smile to cover his stomach, heaving. I'm sure that... Wait a minute, 6 more countries? Last I knew, only 5 countries were invited. Math, Alex was good at. By his count, the US, Britain, Australia, India, and France made 5. Who were the other 2? Had China and Taiwan decided to talk instead of duking it out? That'll make for 10,000 people dead for no good reason after the Battle of the Formosa Strait. But stranger things have happened. Russia and Japan also have confirmed delegations on the way. Ledoux's too sweet smile set Alex's teeth on edge. She was a head shorter than him, but 3 times louder. And meaner. Alex supposed she needed to be to run this place. He wished she'd offer him a seat, but she never did. Alex could conceal his nerves better when sitting. Sometimes he wondered if what happened on Kansas cracked his self-confidence. His inability to save the civilians on the Nake 4 still aided him, even more than his decision not to tell Admiral Hamilton about Kennedy shoving him. Yet complaining about a little push seemed self-serving. Maybe it could have taken Kennedy down with him, but what was the point? Alex was okay with sacrificing his career to save civilians, but throwing it away for nothing burned. He still wanted to prove who shot that Nake, but only conspiracy theorists believed it was the French submarine Barracuda. Right, thanks. He swallowed the urge to swear. Even more fun. At least the Japanese were still friends. Their navy was pretty good, too. Can you at least provide an electronically shielded meeting space for our team? I'm afraid they'll have to rent something from one of the hotels. We can't show preference to one delegation over another, she replied. Every hotel conference room is booked, Alex said. It's spring. Every high-end corporation with a couple $1,000,000 to rub together has conferences here. I'm sorry, but that is not my problem. Ledoux didn't even try the fake smile again, though she didn't quite roll her eyes. I trust you won't do something violent to clear space? Alex flinched. Ledoux never missed a chance to poke at him for the Kansas incident. She was half French and 100% convinced that Americans sank the Nake 4. No amount of explaining could change her mind. Alex stopped trying months ago. Sorry, but that's not my style. If it was, we would have sunk that fucking Nake, he didn't add. Bien sûr, she sneered. So you say. 2 of Ledoux's assistants joined her in glaring from outside the open door. Talk about a no-win situation. Any good tactician knew when to withdraw. Alex was outnumbered and the least popular person in the room. Thanks for the help. Turning on his heel, Alex walked out of her office, collecting staff on his way. His blonde-haired operations officer was in the waiting area, talking to one of Ledoux's security technicians. Lieutenant Commander Stephanie Gomez was one of the most competent officers he ever had the pleasure to work with. Steph was tall, 2 inches taller than Alex, tough and tenacious. She was a good old girl, complete with a southern accent and a love of guns. Alex, born and bred in Connecticut, was her opposite. They clashed over sports, culture, and food, and were friends for life. I managed to snag 2 rooms at the Reunion Hilton for the delegates to sleep in, she said as they walked out. The security guys claim they'll take care of everything, but this thing is less organized than a mud diving contest, sir. Tell me about it. During his 2-hour wait, Alex gathered as much data on the New Old Summit as he could. Admiral Hamilton and Undersecretary of State Martin Fowler and their aides would arrive Friday, 1 day before the summit began. Getting to an underwater station in the middle of the Indian Ocean was difficult by air. Hamilton and Fowler would have to get on a ship or sub that could use one of the transplats. Helicopters didn't have the legs to get to Armistice Station from Mauritius, the closest landmass. Odds were they'd join a warship coming out of Diego Garcia, assuming tensions lessened. Alex forced himself to stop gritting his teeth. That wasn't his problem. His job was to manage an admiral and a politician coming to make peace. And hotel rooms, meeting spaces, security, the general care and feeding of important people. This was not why he joined the Navy. We'll have to let them camp in our office between sessions, Alex scowled. A small, 3-desk office space was exactly what he wanted to share with Admiral Hamilton. Maybe he could just disappear. At least no one can eavesdrop on them electronically, Steph tried to smile. Horseshit, Alex snorted. Even the shielded places leak information like a sieve. Steph's eyes focused on a family passing to their right, dressed in bright colors and covered in souvenirs from Cousteau's underwater adventure park. I might have fixed that a while ago, sir. Alex stopped cold. Might? He studied his principal subordinate, who now watched another family, this one speaking rapid French. Explain? I'm kinda good with computers, sir, and I got annoyed when another teenager hacked us. Not that we've got anything important to hide, but still. The kid messed up Supo's stores list for Jason Dunham before I caught him. Is you saying you're kind of good with computers akin to LS2 Bradshaw saying he's barely involved with smuggling? Alex asked. She flushed. It's not really smuggling if there's no laws against anything. Steph, please fucking tell me you're not involved in Bradshaw's little commercial empire. Alex wanted to shake her. Steph was sharp and dedicated, a hell of an officer. She'd have made a good submariner, which was the highest compliment Alex could give to a service officer. And he never thought her dishonest. "Not involved, sir. I just wrote him a couple of security programs." "Is that what skimmers get up to for fun?" Alex asked. Bradshaw came up in the surface world too, stationed on ships, not submarines. Alex ignored Bradshaw's wheelings and dealings because the kid was brilliant at his job, but he thought better of Steph. She shrugged. "This place loses its appeal after the first month, sir." "Don't I know it?" Alex gave her a hard look. "All right, I'll put you in charge of security for our team, but if LS2 does anything stupid..." "He won't, sir. He's smarter than he lets on." Alex eyed her. "Supo says he's disgruntled and getting out of the Navy." Lieutenant Jesse Lynn should have been the easiest of his small crew for Alex to identify with. Jesse spent his time split between surface ships and submarines, and was an affable, smiling sort of fellow. "No offense, but Jesse's a brick." Stephanie's grin was quick. "A nice brick, but he's not the most observant cat. He still hasn't cottoned on to 90% of Bradshaw's schemes." Not laughing was hard. "Insulting your fellows is unbecoming of an officer and a lady, you know." "I'm a SWO, sir. We eat our young." Alex just shook his head. 11. Playing chess, blindfolded. 9 April 2038. "I'll send another message to Serpak, sir," Captain John Dalton promised as he hung up the phone. USS Enterprise's flag bridge buzzed with activity, but no one approached John as he scowled. Being Rear Admiral McNally's chief of staff was exciting, not to mention career-enhancing, when the Admiral cooperated. With the strike group's deputy commander home on leave for the birth of his third child, John was the second most powerful man in the Enterprise strike group, a status he normally reveled in. Not right now. Admiral McNally was still wrapped up in Missouri's absence. Yeah, not having a fast attack sub along for the ride created problems. John was a submariner himself, not long removed from command of his own fast attack boat. But it wasn't the end of the world. The kerfuffle at Diego Garcia was almost 900 nautical miles south of their intended track. Damaged Indian ships wouldn't come north to contest Enterprise's transit through the Somme, and intelligence said the remaining Indian fleet retreated to port after the scuffle. Admiral McNally might harp on the danger of a submarine sneaking up to intercept the strike group, but John didn't think that likely. If the Indians had a sub along, the 2 American destroyers wouldn't have escaped that little battle. India didn't have the most advanced submarines in the world, but they bought a lot of them over the last decade, both from Russia and France. Sure, they could wait in the approaches to the Somme, but John doubted it. No sane navy wanted to pick a fight inside the Somme, or Strait of Malacca. Combined with the Strait of Singapore, it was one of the Earth's busiest waterways. A quarter of the world's commerce passed through the Somme, over 50,000 ships per year. That came out to an average of almost 400 civilian ships per day. The Enterprise strike group was peanuts in comparison. A battle in the Somme would kill too many innocents. Even advanced torpedoes missed sometimes, and missiles like to shoot the shiniest radar contact they saw when their seekers went live. No one wanted to shoot up civilians by accident. "One last thing, John," a voice said from behind him. John rose and turned away from the computer, belated calls of "Admiral's on the bridge" ringing out from a watchstander behind him. Admiral McNally loved sneaking onto the flag bridge with no one noticing him. Damn him. "Sir?" he asked. John wasn't frightened of admirals, but military courtesy was military courtesy. He was the son of an admiral and a general, fully aware of his own competence and firm in the belief that if he did his job well, he should never fear his boss. John might not be the most photogenic guy. Good sub-food left him with a belly he couldn't shake, and hatred for running meant he never tried very hard. But McNally treated you well if you knew your stuff. John did. Contact 7th Fleet, too. Maybe they have someone lurking in the Somme, McNally said. John shook his head. I already asked. They said no assets available. No assets available. McNally scowled, his voice rising to mock the answer. Do those idiots not realize that destroyers got shot at this morning? I doubt they missed it, sir, John said as gently as he could. Diego Garcia belonged to 7th Fleet, which meant that the admirals outranking McNally judged McNally's arguments insufficient. McNally knew that, of course. He just didn't like it. The closer they got to China, the more the admiral's fretting increased. 2 weeks ago, McNally would have taken Missouri's bent screw philosophically. This was the 5th time he'd brought it up today, and lunch was just over. They have no idea what we're facing out here. McNally started pacing. Staffers buried themselves in their consoles, pretending they couldn't see the boss freaking out. We're 4 days out from the Somme. We'll be in combat 57 hours after that. And they can't be arsed to give us a fucking submarine? We might as well go dancing naked on the flight deck for all the cover the Navy's giving us. 7th Fleet says there's 2 boats coming down with the 4th Strike Group. McNally huffed. At least that's something. Can't one of them join us sooner? Not without getting past the entire Chinese Navy, John said. Satellite imagery made the South China Sea look like a parking lot. Every ship the PLAN owned was underway, along with the entire Republic of China Navy belonging to Taiwan. Only one major battle happened so far, but the dozen minor skirmishes bothered John. The news claimed both sides were backing off while negotiators went to work, with India acting as an intermediary between the two countries. John thought the truth was simpler. Taiwan proved her mettle in the Battle of the Formosa Strait, and China wanted to take a moment to reassess. China expected a quick, bloody invasion, and instead got knocked on their collective communist asses. But people and resources were cheap for the world's largest army and navy. Everyone knew China would win round 2. Which was why Enterprise and her cohorts rushed eastwards while Ford burned south from Japan. The U.S. and Taiwan were old friends, and no one doubted America would stand by Taiwan. The only question was if they'd have to fight their way through the South China Sea to get there. Any submariner worth their salt can sneak past those idiots, McNally said. John grimaced. They're good at ASW, sir. We're better. McNally's eyes narrowed. You telling me you couldn't have crept Zero under that armada? Probably, but it'd be ugly if they spotted us, particularly if the politicians still hadn't sorted out our ROE. Peacetime rules of engagement were different from wartime rules. Less than 3 days away from intervening in a shooting war, Washington still dithered over whether China was an enemy or not. They're hoping our presence stops the shooting. McNally rolled his eyes. It probably will. Even China doesn't want to piss us off. John swallowed. China's navy is twice our size these days. McNally waved a hand. Quality trumps quantity every time. The Chinese are a brown water navy. They're not in our league. No one is. John sighed. McNally, now staring at the floor-to-ceiling tactical display, didn't notice. McNally was old school. He grew up in the days where the U.S. Navy was the biggest, baddest player in the world. Commanding the Enterprise Strike Group was his first time back at sea since commanding a submarine tender 8 years earlier. John, freshly promoted to captain and not long out of command of his own submarine, knew the world changed a lot in that time. China wasn't the only navy to worry about. India's buildup was terrifying in scope. France's presence in the Indian Ocean increased ever since the Kansas incident, too. Even Russia, once a paper tiger, and now the bear once more, deployed down here. And no one liked the U.S., except Taiwan and Australia. Even Taiwan thought Kansas sank that Nake 4. They just couldn't say it without losing American support. John knew better, but how the hell did you prove that to your allies? Of course, sir. John wished McNally would leave so he could get back to planning an adequate defense in case someone did shoot. Take a walk with me, John, the Admiral replied. Captain Edwards invited me to pre-fly for flight ops. Learning about carrier operations won't hurt your career at all. Lead on, Admiral. John could carve out contingency planning time later. McNally was right. If John wanted command of his own strike group someday, he needed to start learning now. Her stateroom on USNS Amelia Earhart was bigger than the entire wardroom on the submarine Freddie Hamilton once commanded. A TAKE, or dry cargo ship like Earhart, had 3 different VIP suites, and as a 2-star admiral, Winifred Hamilton rated the best. Unfortunately, even a submariner could only hole up in a stateroom for so long, so she settled into the common area with a book after breakfast. Seeing the sky while underway was a novelty, but part of Freddie longed for the peculiar smell of dirty socks and fried eggs of her last command. "There you are," her traveling companion said, crossing the room to loom over Freddie on the couch. Martin Fowler sneered. "I thought you'd be on the bridge." "Earhart's crew doesn't need me to micromanage them." Freddie made herself smile. Civilian merchant mariners crewed TAKEs, with a small Navy detail for security. These people knew their business far better than Freddie ever could. She knew 7 ways to sink a cargo ship, but operating one was not her forte. And who would want to? These things were dreadfully slow. "Someone ought to, they're sloppy," he said. Martin Fowler was the Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security Affairs, and he fancied himself an expert on the military. 3 days in his company proved otherwise, but Freddie was too polite to say so. He was a tall man with red hair slicked sideways and wore suits more expensive than Freddie's car. They were usually blue, which brought peacocks to mind instead of the patriotic image Fowler probably aimed for. "They're civilians." She focused on her book, lest she roll her eyes. "They're still Navy civilians. Given the tension in this part of the world, you'd think they'd be on their toes." "Aren't we here to calm things down?" Freddie slid a bookmark into her novel, looking up as calmly as she could. She couldn't concentrate with this egomaniac around. Hadn't anyone ever taught him that towering over people like this was massively rude? Fowler huffed. "That's the easy part." "I'm glad you're confident. Care to make the same wager on the China conflict?" Freddie didn't want to call that a war. Not yet. "Sextate is trying to convince the president to let them duke it out without our help," he shrugged. "Interfering will ruin our trade relationship with China." "If we don't, Taiwan gets curb-stomped," Freddie said. "Taiwan might have the upper hand now, but in the long run, China's sheer numbers would win." "Not our problem." "It is if we don't want World War III to break out." "Nobody wants a war," Fowler said. "We're way past that. The UN will sort things out between the 2 Chinas, and that will be that." "Yeah, that's why the president sent 2 carrier strike groups out to help Taiwan." Freddie would give her left leg to be in Jeff McNally's shoes, but he was years her senior. Her next job, if she did this one well, might be command of a carrier strike group, but her second star was too new. "They'll be recalled." Fowler waved a hand. "It's just a show of force." "I hope you know something I don't know, Mr. Secretary, because what I read in message traffic sounds a lot less reassuring." "You military types always see war where diplomacy will win," he scoffed. "The Navy's the worst of the bunch, too. How many years have you spent harping on other countries' naval buildups and saying we need to do the same? You want a fight." Freddie blinked. "I wouldn't say—" "Not that you'd ever get one," Fowler said. "No one in their right minds would put a woman in command where a war might start." "Excuse me?" Freddie's jaw dropped. Was this stuck-up political creature really going there? "It's nothing personal, it's all political," Fowler laughed, finally backing off a few steps. "Heaven knows I don't have a problem with women in uniform, but the optics would be terrible if something went wrong." "The optics?" Freddie ground each word out, her chest tight. She'd been in uniform for over 20 years. The sub-community was one of the last corners of the Navy to let women in, but Freddie had been the first woman to command a fast-attack submarine. She'd been the first woman to command a submarine squadron, too, but she'd opened the doors for others. 19 women were in submarine command today, with countless others in the pipeline. Women peppered the Navy's hierarchy, too, with 33% of admirals lacking certain private parts, and proud of it. Can you imagine how people would freak out if we had a woman in command of one of those strike groups? Fowler sounded like a 2-year-old. Women in command weren't new in the Navy, but Freddie was used to idiots like this. She smiled her sweetest smile. I imagine it's hard for some men to deal with. It's the politics. Men get stupid when women are in danger. He sniffed, like she didn't understand his point. Freddie wanted to decorate the carpet with his face, but admirals didn't get to do the fun stuff. The ones I've worked with seemed more concerned with my abilities than my lack of gonads, but I suppose the Navy is simpler than politics. It is. You leave the heavy lifting in these discussions to me, and we'll be just fine. His smile was patronizing, and he probably thought it kind. Of course, Freddie said. I'm here to advise you, after all. She could see why the chief of naval operations pulled out of this gig and left Freddie, one of his assistants, holding the bag. 2 days on the same ship as Martin Fowler would make Admiral Chan commit murder. Being on the same underwater station as him would send CNO nuclear. Besides, China and Taiwan were the big fish to fry. Compared to that brewing war, a small shooting incident with India was nothing. Hopefully, Freddie could talk to her opposite number in the Indian Navy and work something out that stopped the shooting before things got worse. If not, she'd help this idiot convince everyone else. Somehow. 12. Disparities. Alex brought his team together for one last planning session on the morning of 9 April, mostly to combat his own jitters. The last 3 days of scrambling to organize the American end of what the media called the Great Summit left him jumpy and winded. Maybe the politicians back home didn't want to ruffle feathers because they opted not to send dozens of government lackeys to Armistice Station. Help would have been nice, though. Alex was no diplomat and didn't care to learn politics. CNN played on the TV in the corner. Alex snuck a glance at it as his people dropped into chairs. Steph was the only one in the office when he arrived, elbows deep in some program or another. He'd learned not to ask. India has demanded reparations from the United States for damage to INS Trikand, the frigate that engaged 2 American destroyers along with the Indian destroyers INS Chennai and Kochi, a reporter said on the television. A busy military base showed in the background. Was that Diego Garcia? In a surprising turn of events, India has demanded full sovereignty over the entire Chagos archipelago, not just Diego Garcia. This stunning demand turns attention away from the brewing war between China and Taiwan, turning the spotlight onto the Great Summit, set to begin tomorrow on Armistice Station. At least we don't have to worry about drones here, Steph said around the pen in her mouth. Yeah, it's the one law this place actually has, Bradshaw scowled. He was perched on a stool next to Steph's desk, watching her go through the security settings for their small office. A stool that magically appeared 2 days earlier and bore a striking resemblance to those in a bar 3 tubes north, right down to the logo of a cat riding a horse. You and Laws really don't get along, do you, LS2? Alex asked. Depends on how you define getting along, sir. Bradshaw looked up at him and grinned. We spend a lot of time together, me and Laws. In the midst of sipping coffee, Alex spat it right back in the cup. Jesus, Bradshaw. What the hell did I do to get sentenced to commanding you? You know you love me, boss, just like I love this place. I thought you hated it here. Lieutenant Jesse Lynn, Alex's supply officer, asked, his nose crinkling. Love, hate, it's all the same, Supo. Bradshaw laughed. Alex rolled his eyes. All right, children, let's stay focused, he said. Supo, do we have tablets and phones for everyone? I got phones for everyone, but only tablets for Admiral Hamilton, Secretary Fowler, and their aides. Lotus was sold out, Jessie said, referring to the biggest electronics store on the station. Armistice Station had station-wide cell phone and internet connectivity, but only if your device was compatible with their particular network. Most American-sold phones and tablets didn't work on the station, and God forbid an admiral or a politician live without a phone. Good enough, Alex said. He was sure Admiral Hamilton would find fault, but Lotus wouldn't get a new shipment until next week. Hopefully, the summit would be over by then. Ops? Steph didn't look up from her screen. 2 different hackers tried to set up eavesdropping programs inside our security system. I rerouted them to listen in on Ponchos. Bradshaw snickered. Ponchos was one of Armistice Station's biggest strip clubs, featuring a large menu of escort services. Its backrooms were legendary. Almost everything short of assault and murder was legal on the station. Alex shook his head. Pretty sure I don't want to be a fly on that wall. That's what they get for trying to eavesdrop, sir. Steph's grin made her dark eyes dance. I really can't control you people, can I? He asked, laughing. No, sir, Steph and Bradshaw answered together. Jessie looked mildly horrified. Sir, I'm not... Don't worry about it, Supo. Alex waved a hand. Okay, back to business. Ops has the electronic end covered. The security detail will be a mite peeved that Supo couldn't get them tablets, but they'll live. Where's GM1 Olsen? Trying to talk her boyfriend at the Hilton into another room or two, Steph replied, chewing on a pen. Isn't that my pen, Ops? Bradshaw asked. You want it back? Ew. Steph giggled. This from the guy who burned his asshole trying to light a fart on fire? Jesus. Alex thought that was only a rumor, but he didn't have time for stupid sailor games. I thought Olsen was dating a guy at Cousteau's. That was last week, Stephanie shrugged. Now it's the gym guy at the Hilton. He thinks he can get her an extra room or 2 for the security detail to base out of. Right. He only had a crew of 4, but they sure were colorful. Gunner's mate First Class Amy Olsen fit that description perfectly. Short, smart, and a spitfire. Let me know if she has any luck. Mm-hmm. Stephanie's attention returned to the screen. What else can I do? Jessie asked. Alex turned to face his always earnest supply officer. Heaven help me, he is a brick. Alex sighed. Admiral Hamilton and Secretary Fowler will arrive on USNS Amelia Earhart. Make sure the cargo ship gets everything they need. And try to get them a better transplant than Platform 7, will you? Platforms 1 through 6 are booked solid, but I'll see what I can do, sir, Jessie replied. Bradshaw's head popped up. A guy in planning owes me money. I can help, Supo. Jessie flushed. I wouldn't want... Go for it, Alex cut in. The last thing he wanted was to listen to Admiral Hamilton berate him for parking Earhart out in the boonies. Each of Armistice Station's 8 transplats, including the one completed last month, had pier space for 24 medium-sized ships like Earhart. Larger ships, like cruise liners, took up multiple berths, and smaller ones could squeeze several in per slip. Platform 1 was the most desirable, being dead center on the original part of the station. Higher numbers crawled outward from there. Platforms 7 and 8 were way out at the end of the station, though geography and construction rates actually left Platform 8 closer to the center than 7, and required a long walk or an outer tube ride to get to the exciting stuff. Cruise ships claimed the closer platforms, with billionaires' yachts tucked in between. Oil tankers, commercial fishing boats, and cargo ships dominated the next closest. Armistice Station exported oil, manganese, and 1,500 tons of fish per day. Armistice Station was an international powerhouse, rich, diverse, and growing like mold. Hell, 3 additional habitats started construction in March. Combined, they'd add almost another square mile to Armistice Station's footprint. One was another underwater oil rig, but the other two contained an underwater water park and a casino. This place is like Vegas on crack. Not that Alex ever went to Vegas. Maybe he'd invite his wife out the next time Nancy had leave. He'd already thrown away his career. What was a few $1,000? All right, he said after a moment. We've got 3 hours to get the rest straightened out, so stay on your toes and try not to piss anyone off. Steph, you'll be with me to meet our guests. Jesse, head over to the Hilton after you and Bradshaw hit up planning. Try to catch Olsen and see if her newest boyfriend worked some magic. Yes, sir, they all said. While his team worked, Alex headed up station to check on preparations for the summit itself. Technically, that wasn't his job, but the butterflies dancing in his stomach said he had to do something. He hated shit like this. Media started coming in yesterday, and his own personal boogeyman, woman, arrived in 3 hours. Hamilton drop-kicked him out of the subforce. No doubt she was responsible for sending him to this dead end. It wasn't like you could bury someone much deeper than 300 feet underwater. Exiting the Elkman tube, Alex hung a right and joined the flow in the Cook tube, the station's main drag. He passed 2 outer tube joiners along the way, but avoided the crowds waiting for Armistice Station's underwater train. Blue Jacket's conference center was at the north intersection of Cook and Ballard. Cook ran in a circle, and Ballard shot off it like an extra limb, going the deepest of all Armistice Station's levels. It was more of a building than a proper tube, with 6 stories, the bottom of which sat on the ocean floor. Only Ballard touched the bottom. Every other tube perched on spindly legs like a misshapen spider. Blue Jackets occupied the 3 lower levels of Ballard, a sprawling set of conference rooms and fancy restaurants built to cater to executives and the ultra-rich. The place was booked solid through 2041, and Alex had no idea how the Great Summit acquired space on short notice. Probably bribery. Who am I kidding? Heading down a wide staircase that looked like it belonged on Titanic, Alex noticed security teams sweeping all 6 floors. One of the few perks of being the Naval Detachment's OIC meant that Alex's security clearance allowed him access to almost any part of the station, and the guards waved him past. Within 5 minutes he entered the Challenger room, blinking in the sudden bright light. A long wooden table was the centerpiece of the Challenger room. Why the hell would someone haul that polished monstrosity down to the bottom of the Indian Ocean? Using a constructed composite would have been easier, but some brainchild probably thought wood looked more dignified. Guess they weren't going for cheap, he thought, looking at the paneled walls and decorative light fixtures. The room even smelled like wood, though slightly artificial. Alex bet they used an air freshener for that. What are you doing here, Commander Coleman? Ada Ledoux spun to face him, hands on her hips and eyes narrowed. Alex blinked. I came to see how preparations were. That's not your business. Ledoux came 3 strides closer, almost right into his face. Excuse me? Alex burned a step back, but stopped himself. I need you to leave. What? Immédiatement. She slashed a hand in the direction of the door as Alex blinked in confusion. Ms. Ledoux, as the senior American representative here on the station. God, Alex wished he was anything but. I'm responsible for ensuring our team is prepared. That includes putting eyes on the meeting space. Well, you have seen it. She crossed her arms. Now get out. We are in a hurry and do not have time for you. Alex glanced around the room. Nothing seemed out of place. There wasn't missing paint on the walls or any other emergent problem. Why was Ledoux so adamant? On the other hand, he was merely a guest in her playground. Her not-so-politely worded demand bore the force of law on Armistice Station. Alex smiled tightly. Glad to help. He gave her a curt nod and departed, heading back up the stairs. On the way up, he almost bumped into a group of French sailors speaking rapidly among themselves. Skittering out of the way, Alex watched the group disappear into the Challenger room. No one yelled at them. Interesting. 13. Boogeymen. The boss was nervous, and that wasn't his style. Steph Gomez had worked for some real characters in her career so far. Her first CO was a screamer, fit to blister bulkheads with insults and swear words. He'd been a hell of a ship driver, though, able to make USS Liberty spin circles on the head of a pin. She learned a lot there, though not about leadership. Her second ship was better, though Steph was billeted as an engineer there, not her forte. But surface warfare officers were jacks of all trades, masters of none, so she did her time in a ship's dark underbelly like everyone else. Being a department head was different. There she got to choose her job, and she was the operations officer, first on a destroyer, and later a cruiser. Both of those COs were sane human beings and good leaders. Captain Rosario on Bella Wood was the best she worked for until she met Commander Coleman. He wasn't the kind of boss you wanted to go to war with, but hey, they weren't at war. Unlike Alex, Steph volunteered to come to Armistice Station. She wasn't married, and juggling the schedules of every Navy ship that wanted to come to the world's largest underwater station was career-enhancing. Challenging, too. Admirals knew her name, and Steph liked that. She'd been in just under 10 years, and she wanted to make the Navy a career. That was why she volunteered to go up to Platform 3 to meet Rear Admiral Hamilton. Sure, Hamilton was a submariner, but she was also a woman. Female admirals were still rare, and Steph wouldn't pass up the opportunity to impress one. Besides, seeing the sun was nice. Wandering up to the transplats to sunbathe was discouraged, but Steph was a Louisiana girl used to long, bright days. With 20 ships or subs tied up to each, the platforms were always busy. Cranes, conveyor belts, and passengers vied for space. Usually, the passengers lost. Armistice Station's ready lifeboat got a lot of use. There were at least 2 man-overboards every day. Today's was a 16-year-old who tried to take a picture standing on a bollard, only to slip and fall right into the Indian Ocean. His phone, presumably, was still on the bottom, and good riddance to that. None of this explained why Alex was fretting. He wasn't a fretter. Sure, he didn't like public speaking, which was fine with Steph, since she was always happy to step up. But he was a pretty cool cucumber. He didn't sweat the stupid stuff, unlike most everyone else. Even Captain Rosario got wrapped around some pretty silly problems back on Bella Wood. The Liberty incidents they dealt with daily on Armistice Station would have given her apoplexy. Commander Coleman just took it in stride, usually with a smile and a joke to loosen things up. But there was a frown on his face as they watched Armistice Station's bosun's mates swing a brow over to USNS Amelia Earhart. The 40,000-ton cargo ship dwarfed the sleek black superyacht astern of her, but was a gray blob next to the giant white cruise liner across the pier. Admiral Hamilton and Secretary Fowler were nowhere in sight, but that wasn't surprising. Junior officers waited on their seniors, not the other way around. "You okay, sir?" she asked, watching his hands go into his pockets and come out again. They were in uniform, something they only did when Navy ships visited. The locals didn't like it the rest of the time, not after the Kansas incident. Alex shrugged. "Yeah. Not to be rude, but you're a shit liar." Steph grinned. "Didn't we both have to memorize some honor code or another about that at some little military school in Vermont?" "That was a long time ago." But he laughed, which Steph counted as a victory. "I guess it's easier to remember when you're not old." Not that she was much younger than Alex. Steph graduated college in 2031, just 6 years after her current boss. Both commissioned at Norwich University, the nation's oldest private military college. Predominantly an army school, with a large smattering of Marines. Norwich didn't graduate many naval officers. Steph only served with 3 others so far in her career, one a classmate also on her first ship. Norwich grads were predictable in their unpredictability, known for thinking outside the box. Working for one was nice. Easy now. You're not far off that terrible fate yourself, he said. At least my chosen profession lets me see the sun. She gestured at the sky. Current billet aside, I hear spending years underwater makes you age faster. Alex surprised her with a scowl. Not a problem I've got these days, current billet notwithstanding. I don't follow. Let's just say I'm not here because of my popularity in the sub-community, he replied. Or with Admiral Hamilton. Steph opened her mouth to ask more, but a ringing bell over Earhart's 1MC, or general announcing system, cut her off. Ding, 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 ding. Then a voice announced, Rear Admiral Upper Half departing. Steph's eyes tracked up the brow as Admiral Hamilton walked down, trailed by a lieutenant commander, probably her aide, and two guys in fancy suits. One of those had to be the Undersecretary of State, but Steph had no idea which. Winifred Hamilton was a few inches taller than Steph, and her brown hair either hadn't gone gray or was dyed. She wore a frown before she got even halfway down the brow, and when her eyes landed on Alex, they narrowed. Steph and Alex both saluted. Admiral Hamilton returned it. Hamilton frowned. Commander Coleman, I hadn't expected to see you here, she said. Admiral? His face closed off, the easy smile gone. Welcome to Armistice Station. Allow me to introduce Lieutenant Commander Stephanie Gomez, my operations officer. It's a pleasure, Commander. Hamilton offered Steph her hand, a courtesy she didn't extend to Alex. What the hell kind of bad blood was there between these two? But Steph shook the hand. She wasn't an idiot. And she was so not getting in the middle of a mess Alex clearly wanted her outside of. Nice to meet you, ma'am, she replied. This is Lieutenant Commander Maria Vasquez, my aide, Hamilton continued, gesturing at the short, impeccably groomed woman by her side. Vasquez's smile seemed genuine, however. Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security Affairs, Martin Fowler, and his assistant, Mr. James Gage. More handshakes were exchanged. Fowler looked down his nose at all four naval officers. Gage looked around with wide eyes. No one bothered to introduce the security officers trailing the quartet. Both looked bored. Are we going to stand here all day, or is there somewhere better to go? Fowler sniffed the air, glaring back at Earhart. Steph didn't miss the slight scowl on Hamilton's face as Alex replied, There are rooms reserved for you at the Reunion Hilton. Unfortunately, due to the short notice, you'll have to share with your aides. That's unacceptable, Fowler scowled. I'm the Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security Affairs. The hotel is booked, Alex shrugged. It's the height of vacation season. Fowler crossed his arms. I don't care. There must be something you can do, or someone more senior can. I'm afraid I'm the senior American representative. Let's not ask for the impossible, Mr. Secretary, Hamilton said. Was it Steph's imagination, or did she straight up ignore Alex? I'm sure Commander Coleman did everything he could. Alex colored slightly at her arch tone, and Steph couldn't help swallowing. This is going to be an interesting week. Then let's proceed with this train wreck. Fowler rolled his eyes. At least we're here early enough to start informal conversations. I trust you've at least reserved some sort of conference room? Steph cringed and then watched Hamilton's eyes zero in on that. You're welcome to use the conference area in our offices, Alex said, his face twitching. It's electronically shielded against eavesdropping. At least that's something. Fowler rubbed the back of his hand over his mouth like he was chasing away a horrid smell. Could politicians pout? Steph wanted to say something, but along that road was career suicide. So she kept her mouth shut. So did Alex. Nancy hated video calls. She had 1,000 better things to do, like promoting STG-2 Arnold or figuring out which shipboard prankster stole the medical dummy this time. Fletcher's satellite bandwidth left a lot to be desired, too. Getting up in video with a flagship meant disconnecting every other internet hub on the ship that wasn't classified, which led to disgruntled sailors and a bad connection. The Navy's classified video messaging software looked like a ripoff of the long-dead Skype program, too, only less reliable. Unfortunately, Admiral McNally loved his face-to-face chats, so here Nancy was, sitting at the wardroom table with her XO, Lieutenant Commander Ying Mai. Ying was a Fletcher old-timer, on board 10 months longer than Nancy. She was the XO for Nancy's predecessor, too, and was originally his relief. Alas, Commander Murray decided to diddle a young second-class petty officer, so Nancy got Fletcher, and Ying's move upstairs was delayed. As far as Nancy knew, Murray worked for some defense contractor these days, counting beans and bullets. She didn't pity him. Sighing, Nancy played with her class ring and tried to conceal her boredom. She hated sitting still, hated the idea of the staff job awaiting her after this one. Command was the pinnacle of a naval officer's career. Everything after this was downhill. Unless she could get a cruiser. That would be worth it. But with Nancy's luck, she'd end up sitting in a building commanding a destroyer squadron. She loved the Navy, but the Navy wasn't always good at loving her back. The work-life balance sucked, and being married to a submariner meant it was a miracle they'd managed to have 2 kids when they were young and dumb. "Captain Rosario, what are the results of your Liberty incidents in Rhodes?" McNally asked from the screen. Nancy stifled a groan. Was he still on about that? Yeah, some sailors were stupid, but sailors were always drunken fools, and at least the Greeks understood. 4 sailors went to captain's mast, sir, Captain Julia Rosario of USS Bella Wood replied. Bella Wood was a cruiser, and thus the second most important ship in the strike group, behind the carrier. Her captain was widely respected and had to hate this conversation, but Rosario's calm expression never twitched. "And?" McNally demanded. Did Nancy see the Admiral's chief of staff cringe in the background? Probably. He didn't have much patience for this crap either, though she expected him to hide it better. He liked that staff bullshit. Rosario blinked. 3 were found guilty and fined a half-month's pay for 2 months. The other was busted down a rank, which I suspended due to extenuating circumstances. What kind of extenuating circumstances? McNally's eyes narrowed, like Rosario was the one who'd lit off a restaurant's fire extinguisher and sent 2 shipmates to the hospital. Nancy checked to make sure her microphone was muted before glancing at Ying. Does he have to do this? Being treated like a miscreant child who can't manage my own warship is grating. Admirals are admirals, ma'am, Ying shrugged, then grimaced. Heads up, our turn on the grill is incoming. Straightening, Nancy unmuted the call. McNally's eyes zeroed in like the lasers General Dynamics promised they'd install on her ship, but never managed. Commander Coleman, what happened with your sailors who broke curfew? McNally asked. All are on liberty risk, sir, Nancy said. Captain Dalton's friendly email warned her not to ignore her own problem children, even if they'd only been 5 minutes late. Who could guess their bus would get in an accident? Nancy was generally more hard-ass than handholder, but she would have let the sailors go with a warning. But not with micromanager McNally in command of the strike group. Good news, McNally said. Now, Captain Dalton will brief our updated transit plan. COS? Dalton clicked a few buttons and a PowerPoint slide replaced the images of Nancy's fellow captains. Nancy suppressed a smile. People who said the Navy ran on PowerPoint weren't wrong. Missiles they could do without, but Microsoft Office? Not a prayer. The slide showed the approaches to the Strait of Malacca, along with the strike group's intended course. We'll reach the Strait of Malacca in just under 2 days. Our transit speed will be 25 knots, Dalton said. Bella Wood will have 2 helicopters up, one ahead of the formation and one astern. Fletcher will be the ready deck for the forward helicopter, with John Finn the same at the tail end. Kidd will have 1 helo at Alert 5, ready to launch at the first sight of trouble. All 3 helos will be outfitted with the standard snooping package and armed for a surface engagement. Nancy pushed the talk button as the slide vanished. Will there be an alert ASW helicopter? Dalton twitched. McNally answered. Your helo should be outfitted and in the hangar, Commander. We can't afford to anger the locals by using an anti-submarine helo during transit. Of course not, sir, Nancy replied. But if you swapped the ready deck to the carrier, we could have my helo on deck and... Absolutely not. That helo will range in front of the formation, and I want the closest deck ready. Fletcher will remain our forward eyes and ears for sub-threats. We may not be the best for that job. Nancy pressed on when she saw McNally's heavy eyebrows wiggle. Our organic sonar capabilities degrade significantly at high speed. McNally glowered. Don't you have dampers for that? Not very good ones, Nancy grimaced. The newest version of the program. I'm sure you'll manage, Commander. My experience with the next-gen dampers says they'll outperform manufacturing specifications. And I like Fletcher's speed up front. Nancy felt her shoulders tense. Yes, sir. She ignored the rest of the discussion. Captain Rosario voiced concern about refueling the helicopters, since international law only permitted transit passage, and the run through the Somme was 550 nautical miles. Captain Edwards from Enterprise wanted more fresh fruit and vegetables, and the two Arleigh Burke COs worried about gas. The older destroyers were gas guzzlers compared to Nancy's O'Bannon class. That was one thing the Navy did right when they built the newer ships. Anti-submarine warfare capability wasn't something the Navy did well with Fletcher and her sisters, however. Nancy didn't mind danger, and if they faced a surface threat, she'd gladly take on 2 of any other nation's destroyers and call the odds even. But McNally expected Fletcher to detect subs with only her under-the-bow sonar dome. Despite what McNally said, and whatever different brand dampers subs had, because Nancy knew the damned things weren't the same, the odds of that happening at 25 knots were about 20%. That left a lot of undetected submarines. Looks like we're first into the meat grinder, Ying said after they disconnected. Hopefully he'll change formation before we get to the South China Sea. Nancy sat back and sighed. I think Captain Dalton caught on at least. He's the guy that ran the Saratoga strike group ragged a few years ago. He knows how much our sonar suffers at speed. He is? I had a friend on Hull. They said Zero was practically impossible to hear. Yeah, he's pretty good. Nancy didn't like playing on friendships in the professional sphere, but she knew John Dalton pretty well. Not as well as her husband did. John and Alex combined were trouble waiting to happen, but well enough that she suggested John as their older daughter's godfather. It didn't hurt that John was also married to Nancy's college roommate. Janet Dalton had good taste. Ying scratched her chin. At least Chinese attack subs are loud. The nukes are, anyway. Nancy shook her head. The odds of anyone shooting at us out here are low, despite what happened near Diego Garcia. We won't have that going for us once we get closer to China. Not unless the politicians talk really fast, yeah? You ever known that to work? Nancy rolled her eyes, waving off Ying's answer. They both knew war was coming. It was inevitable, so long as China wanted to reclaim Taiwan. The U.S. Navy spent years planning for this. China continued clinging to a strange marriage of communism and capitalism, all the while insisting Taiwan's government and people were rebels. Taiwan, on the other hand, claimed to be the legitimate government of China. That uneasy state persisted for decades, but internal conflict in China was on the rise. Several splinter groups within China, most of them in Hong Kong, demanded democratic representation and more freedoms, which Nancy knew would lead to war. Autocracies worked like that. China needed an external enemy, and Taiwan was the nearest target. Unfortunately for China, Taiwan had a big, mean friend, and the United States meant to stand with their friend, even if it meant getting in a shooting war with the People's Republic of China. That was a lot less fun than I hoped, Steph said as they walked away from the Hilton. Tell me about it. Alex tried not to groan. He was supposed to be professional, and Steph worked for him. But getting rid of Admiral Hamilton and Secretary Fowler was the highlight of his day, and damn it all, he trusted her. And we get to do it all over again tomorrow. Her smile was bright and fake. Just be grateful they'll be stuck in meetings we don't have to go to, he replied. Small favors, right, boss? Very small. Alex didn't like feeling tiny. Every time Admiral Hamilton looked his way, it was clear she wanted to squash him like a bug. So, what's up between you and Admiral Hamilton, sir? You never did say, Steph asked as they hung a right and entered the bass tube. Lotus and Ponchos were to their right, the latter with a sign out saying they were at capacity already. Speed sub racers took up 100 feet of the bass's left side, with a line 50 deep. This consisted of colorfully dressed college students with daddy's money to spend. Renting a fast, colorful 2-passenger mini-submarine cost about $1,000 an hour. Speed sub racers had 20 of the things, when they all worked, and rumors said the owners planned to open another site next time the station expanded. Staring at that line wouldn't get him out of answering, would it? Alex sighed. I was XO on Kansas 6 months ago. Stephanie stopped to gape. For the Kansas incident? That's the one. Shit. She glanced at Ponchos and then back to Alex again. You guys didn't. Fuck no, we didn't. No need to tell her about how he doomed his career. Alex still didn't regret that. To hell with Chris Kennedy and his glory hunting. But we don't know who did. Alex swallowed. Admiral Hamilton might have cleared Kansas of wrongdoing, but no one believed that. The French-led international investigation concluded that Kansas was the only sub on the bearing the torpedoes came from. Yet, even the French admitted Kansas had a full torpedo room when the U.S. Navy begrudgingly allowed inspectors on board. In the end, the international community didn't officially blame Kansas, but the lack of exoneration shouted what they thought was the truth. Why the hell would they send you here? Steph asked. Were they trying to cause an international incident? Another voice answered before Alex could speak. That is a terribly good question, Camille Dubois said. Alex spun. Dubois wore her dress uniform, as did the man to her right. He was a captain and just as annoyingly photogenic as Dubois. His hair and eyes were dark, his bearing proud to the point of arrogance. Both watched Alex and Stephanie with predatory glares that reminded him of Admiral Hamilton. Just worse. What the hell are you doing here? Alex snapped. Armistice Station is an independent station, no? Dubois smiled the same smug smile she wore when Kansas's logs proved mysteriously erased. We are here for, how do you say, liberty? He'd never wanted to hit a woman so much. I hope you enjoy it, Alex said through gritted teeth. I shall enjoy it far more now that I know you are here. She said something in French to her companion, who laughed. The only word Alex caught was Kansas, but that was enough. Telling stories again, Commander? He asked, pasting on his own false smile. She laughed. Why would I need to do that? Steph looked between the two like she was watching a cage match, her eyes wide and uncertain. I think we should get out of here, boss, she whispered. You Americans are terribly inhospitable, the French captain said, his eyes gleaming. A Frenchman would invite you for a drink and become friends. Alex bit back a snarl. I think it's a bit late for that. Capitaine Jules Rochambeau of Barracuda. Rochambeau held out a hand. Commander Alex Coleman. Alex shook his hand, because what the hell else was he supposed to do? The alternative was causing an international incident. Shit, he wanted to. He recognized that voice, the cold one that miraculously showed up after the Nake sunk, pinning all the blame on Kansas. Rochambeau didn't look like a murderer, but what else did you call someone who sank a sub full of civilians? That idea no longer felt like a conspiracy theory. Oui, Rochambeau smiled. Camille has told me much about you. I must admit I admire your tenacity. Do you? Alex felt cold. Had Dubois told this man what happened? Why would the French want to shoot a civilian submarine anyway? Nothing made sense. Very much. The bastard sounded sincere. Fury wanted to make Alex's hand shake. Excuse us, some of us have work to do. Bien sûr, Rochambeau nodded. It was a pleasure. Yeah. Alex gestured to Steph, and they headed further down Bass as Dubois and Rochambeau ducked past the capacity sign and into Poncho's. What the hell was that about? Steph hissed after 20 feet. Sir? Fuck if I know. Butterflies reared up into Alex's throat. Meeting Dubois was a coincidence. Nasty, sure, but nothing important. Steph frowned. How do you know a French commander? She was a liaison on Kansas when the Nake went down. She's a lying piece of shit, but I still don't know why. Is she the one who said we did it? Yep, and Barracuda was the French sub that showed up right when everything went to shit, too. Alex glanced over his shoulder to glare at Poncho's, but the pair was long gone. Good fucking riddance. But why were French officers here on Liberty during the summit? Particularly these French officers. Something was happening way above his pay grade, and Alex really didn't like mysteries. He needed more coffee to deal with this shit. 14. Happenstance. 10 April 2038. 5 minutes after Nancy walked into Fletcher's anchor windlass, looking for contraband, misstored cleaning chemicals, and a pallet of sodas that mysteriously disappeared during Fletcher's last underway replenishment, she found the missing medical dummy. Really, gents? She twisted to look at Lieutenant Junior Grade Karam and the 3 bosun's mates by his side. Karam was Fletcher's first lieutenant, in charge of Deck Division, the most rough-and-tumble sailors in the Navy. Senior Chief Albertson grinned sheepishly. If I said it's part of an ongoing prank war, would you be willing to let it go, Captain? Do I want to know who you're pranking? Not you. Nancy shook her head, biting her lip to resist a laugh. That's ominous. She glanced at Karam. You in on this, Ali? Karam flushed. I plead the fifth, ma'am. Nancy's radio crackled before she could answer. Captain, officer of the deck, we're being queried by the Indian Navy. I'll be right there, she replied, twisting to look back at Karam and his sailors. We'll postpone this spot check for now. I'm sure you don't mind, do you, boats? Senior Chief Albertson chuckled. No, ma'am, we'll be ready whenever you are. I don't doubt it, Nancy smiled. They both knew anchor windlass was one of the destroyer's trouble spots, but Albertson's boys and girls had it spotless today. No way was the missing pallet of soda hiding in there either. Nancy's thieves must have found new homes for their misbegotten gains. She'd find them eventually, just not today. All our problems come on Tuesdays, Captain, Albertson grinned. Nancy laughed before heading for the nearest ladder, sprinting up 6 decks to the bridge. Her smile vanished as she entered Fletcher's pilot house. Normally one of her favorite places, today the air crackled with tension. The bridge was on the destroyer's top level, with windows on 3 sides. A modern warship's nerve center was in their CIC, or Combat Information Center, but all ships were driven from the bridge. Nancy strode in the aft door, slamming the lever down and dogging it shut. Navigation radar consoles were to her left, and electronic charts to her right. The helm was straight ahead, a young sailor gripping the wheel with white knuckles. The quartermaster of the watch whispered with his bosun's mate counterpart, while the officer of the deck and conning officer, both junior lieutenants, stood near the center line. Captain's on the bridge, bosun's mate 3rd Class Holloway noticed her first. Carry on, Nancy said. What's going on, OOD? Lieutenant Junior Grade Marcy Matthews turned to her. Ma'am, we've been queried by the Indian Navy. I gave them the normal spiel about operating in international waters in accordance with international law, but they got testy. Define testy. They're demanding we provide our ultimate destination. Marcy grimaced. Nancy frowned. That was abnormal, not to mention rude. Tensions between American warships and their former friends and allies were still high. France blaming the U.S. for the Kansas incident made them few friends in the Indian Ocean, particularly with nations who lost people on board the Nake submarine. But the Indian Navy was a professional organization. They knew how this game worked. A professional organization we exchanged missiles with 4 days ago. Crap. Fletcher was the on-duty query ship, still leading the strike group by 5 miles, but it was time to kick this one upstairs. Nancy cleared her throat. All right, let's... An accented voice interrupted her, hissing out of the nearby bridge-to-bridge radio. American warship, this is Indian naval ship Porbandar. Identify yourself, your destination, and state your intentions. If you do not respond immediately, you will be subject to enforcement actions. Over. You want to take that, ma'am? Marcy asked, her eyes wide. Sure, hand it over. Nancy took a deep breath. Subject to enforcement actions was Navy speak for, I can force you to do what I want. Nancy used such words on her last ship, when sent to hunt down resurgent Somali pirates. But no one said things like that to the U.S. Navy. Porbandar, this is U.S. Navy warship 155, she said. I am operating in international waters in accordance with international law. My course is 127 and my speed 25 knots. Request you stay clear. Over. Fletcher, this is Porbandar, the other voice replied, making Nancy's eyes narrow. State your intentions and destination immediately. Over. Marcy hissed. Nancy shrugged as nonchalantly as she could. He can read Jane's, she said. No big deal. Except U.S. Navy warships didn't identify themselves by name on open radio channels, and the Indians knew that. Porbandar's rudeness was no accident. Porbandar is a Visakhapatnam-class DDG. Marcy thumbed through their own copy of Jane's fighting ships. 32 VLS cells for Barak 8 surface-to-air missiles, and 16 cells for BrahMos anti-ship missiles. One 127mm Auto Malara gun and 4 Sea-Wiz mounts. Carries 2 Sea King helicopters and has 4 torpedo tubes. Thanks, Marcy. Nancy's heart pounded. The 2 destroyers damaged near Diego Garcia faced a Visakhapatnam-class guided missile destroyer, and hadn't done too well. But both those destroyers were Burke's, and only carried 8 Harpoon missiles between them. Fletcher had 16, and hers were Harpoon Block 2s, the newer version that could be fired from their vertical launch system instead of canisters strapped on as an afterthought. Fletcher might not be great against submarines, but she could take an Indian destroyer, maybe even 2. But she couldn't shoot first. Their standing rules of engagement said that Fletcher could only fire if fired upon. Nancy glanced at the radar. Porbandar was 15 miles away, an eye blink for a BrahMos missile. Those things were the fastest cruise missiles in the world and could get up to Mach 7 or over 4,500 knots. Fletcher's harpoons were a lot slower. Call CIC and have them get on chat to the strike group. Let them know our Indian friends are being pushy, she said to Marcy before lifting the bridge-to-bridge handset again. Porbandar, this is Fletcher Actual. My intentions are peaceful. I am in transit to the Strait of Malacca. Over. De-escalation was an order. Admiral McNally might not like her forking over information, but Admiral McNally wasn't here, and their destination was obvious to anyone with half a brain. Did submariners even know how to talk on bridge-to-bridge? Fletcher Actual, this is Porbandar. The snooty voice sounded a little less angry. Was that good? We will remain outside 10 nautical miles of your vessel. Recommend you do likewise. Over. This is Fletcher Actual. Roger. Thank you. Out. Nancy hung up the handset, mind whirling. You think they'll keep that promise, ma'am? Marcy swallowed. We'll find out. I'll be down in combat. This was a development Nancy needed to call in herself. Admiral McNally might obsess over the submarine threat, but a surface engagement would ruin his day too. Besides, Enterprise was well within Brahmos range. Thank God Alex didn't work at the Hilton. Judging from the way Fowler bitched about everything in their office, from the temperature of the coffee to the color of their lights, he was hell on hotel staff. Then again, they were trained to deal with difficult customers. Alex was trained for submarine warfare. Not that he'd ever get a chance to do that. Don't be an ass. You made your choices. He'd do the same thing all over again, assuming he had to. But it still burned. I need a liaison. Someone who knows how this place works, Fowler said, sitting in Alex's chair with his arms crossed. Alex was surprised he didn't have his feet up. Someone should tell him he's wrinkling his expensive suit. Or does he just make his aide iron it? One thing that Armistice Station didn't do well was dry cleaning. Most of the substances used in the process were toxic in one way or another, and no station manager with a brain wanted to dispose of more hazardous waste than they had to. We've already briefed your security teams with a complete layout of the station, Alex replied, resisting the urge to shove his hands in his pockets. There was no need to mention how that layout included places on the station not fit for public viewing. Ledoux didn't need to know how staff hacked into their systems a long time ago. Lieutenant Commander Gomez will escort you to Blue Jackets each day. To what? Fowler asked, then busied himself brushing non-existent lint off his shoulders. Someone didn't read the briefing packet. Alex forced a smile. Blue Jackets is the name of the conference center where the summit will be held. Of course, Fowler glared. Alex tried not to flinch, but it was hard when Admiral Hamilton's eyes followed him. Maybe Alex should have told her the truth. But with Kennedy gunning for him, who'd believe the XO? I noticed that Blue Jackets only has one entrance, Hamilton said. Is that going to be a problem? According to Madame Ledoux, she's the station administrator, that will make security checks easier, Alex replied. We have to go through security? Fowler rolled his eyes. How typical of the military. Armistice Station got 4 terrorist threats in the last 3 months, Alex replied. They take security seriously here. As should any place hosting so many nations, he didn't add. Fowler sniffed. I suppose they'll want to do something barbaric like pat us down. They have body scanners for that, Mr. Secretary. Fowler's smile was poisonous. You didn't reply to my request for a liaison. He twisted in his chair, eyeing Jessie. What's your name? Me? Jessie's eyes widened. Lieutenant Lin, sir. You'll suffice. Mr. Secretary, I'm not... Jessie blinked. I mean, Steph will be your escort, and I'm sure she's more qualified. I'd be happy to be your liaison, sir, Steph said. I'm our anti-terrorism officer in addition to being the operations officer, and I'm familiar with the station's security plans. Fowler's eyes narrowed. That won't be necessary. I'm sure you're busy. Actually, Jesse's busier than I am. He's working with Amelia Earhart to... Steph trailed off when Fowler shook his head. Thank you for your opinion, Lieutenant Commander, he said. Admiral Hamilton's eyes narrowed. Mr. Secretary, is there a reason why you want a supply officer instead of someone trained to assist you? She asked. Or is this another case of your optics? Who I want as my liaison isn't your business, Admiral. No, but it is my profession. Hamilton was the only one in the room unaffected by Fowler's deepening glare. She folded her hands. You may not be aware that supply officers are restricted line officers, which means— I know what it means. I've studied your precious military, thank you very much. I'm aware of how this works. Fowler rose, looming over everyone. Lieutenant Lin is far more respectful, and I will have him as my liaison. Respectful? Hamilton echoed as Steph flushed red. Had Steph somehow pissed Fowler off? Alex frowned. She hadn't gone near the politician on her own, had she? My decision is final, Fowler sneered. And as the chief of this mission, I'll hear nothing else about it from you, Admiral. Your narrow military perspective is not required. Hamilton's return glare could melt high-80 steel. Alex wanted to enjoy the encounter. Watching someone take Freddie Hamilton down a peg was nice. Except Fowler reminded Alex of the petty tyrant Kennedy was when things didn't go his way. Wasn't that a happy thought? Feeling grudging respect for Hamilton annoyed him, which in turn made Alex feel small and petty. Lieutenant Lin will be happy to assist you, Mr. Secretary, Alex said before anyone could explode. How was he the peacekeeper here? Someone had to say something, though. He swallowed back nerves. Commander Gomez will continue to work background security for the summit. Steph shot him a look he couldn't read, and Hamilton seemed dissatisfied. But what the hell was he supposed to do when an Undersecretary of State waltzed in making ridiculous demands? Jesse could do the job, sure. His talents laid elsewhere, but he wasn't incompetent. Bradford called Jesse as blunt as a post and twice as thick, but maybe Fowler would like that. This political shit was for the birds. He was so over his head. Thankfully, Fowler left, with Jesse in tow, a few minutes later, grumbling something about shopping for his wife before the summit started in the afternoon. Jesse dragged his feet and shot pleading glances Steph's way, but she just shrugged. Alex gestured her over after Hamilton and her aide left. I'm sorry about that, he said. I don't think— That he likes women in uniform? Yeah, you can say that, sir. Steph glared at the door Fowler swanned out. He might as well be wearing it in neon lights on his ass. Yeah, that. Shit, this kind of misogynistic asshole wasn't supposed to be allowed out in public, and the government definitely wasn't supposed to employ them. I'll survive, sir, Stephanie sighed. He's not the first twat waffle I've encountered, and he's only here for a few weeks. Less if they fuck this up, Alex sighed, glancing around the conference room. The Armistice Station grapevine said the other delegations arrived last night and early this morning. China almost sent a team before bowing out at the last minute, which simplified things mightily. They were still pissed off about the American strike group headed towards their front yard, though that was a problem for the United Nations. They were in emergency council, according to the news. A message from USS Fletcher said that the Indian Navy was feeling frisky, and Alex wondered how that would play out during the summit. Not that he'd be around to see. He wasn't important enough to sit through the meetings, a minor fact that made Alex feel warm and fuzzy. Who wanted to listen to politicians argue all day? You know, boss, it's funny you say that, Bradshaw said from the doorway. Alex turned. Where the hell did you wander off to? I thought Supo asked you to make sure there were breakfast munchies out for this meeting. I forgot. Forgot so much that Ops had to buy donuts from that scam down on Earl? Yeah, good job, Alex replied. Sorry about that, Ops. Bradshaw tried a winning smile on Steph, who ignored it. Sure you are, she said. Olsen and I got distracted by some French Marines, Bradshaw replied, gesturing at the petty officer to his right. She wanted to flirt with him. As if, Olsen snorted. Gunner's mate First Class Amy Olsen was sharp, where Bradshaw was sneaky. She was the picture of the straight and narrow sailor, high speed and dedicated. She made every rank on the first try and aced every test. Unlike Alex, she volunteered to come to Armistice Station. And she liked it here, which made her a weird friend for Bradshaw to make, but the two argued like siblings. French Marines? Alex blinked. Armistice Station was a long way from France. Who wanted to bring Marines all the way down here? Do French subs carry Marines? Steph said at the same time. Not if they're as small as ours, Olsen replied, tucking a strand of curly red hair behind her left ear. And not this many. There were a god-awful lot of them. A lot as in how many? Alex asked. Couple dozen? Bradshaw chewed his lip. Oh, great. He was chewing tobacco. Again. Alex wished that gross stuff would just die, but the damned surface navy clung to it. Bradshaw swirled his dip around before adding, Maybe more? I counted 53. Olsen shot Bradshaw a triumphant look, reminding Alex of his younger daughter lording knowledge over her older sister. Alex frowned. 53 Marines sure enough don't fit in a fast attack submarine. You're sure those Frenchies were on a fast attack? Stephanie asked. Yeah. Alex swallowed back memories. Barracuda is one of the new Requins, on par with our Ceros, maybe better. So, assuming those Marines didn't come in with Barracuda, where did they come from? His people exchanged glances. I can pull up manifests for other visiting ships, Steph said. They won't say they're carrying French Marines, but maybe there's another French ship here for liberty? I think we'd have noticed, Bradshaw said. Olsen snorted. Only if they wanted stuff from your not-quite-illegal friends. Hey, it makes for a good information network. Bradshaw gestured around. And it gets me out of our palatial office, and away from your snooty self. 3 wins, if you ask me. Bite me. Olsen smiled sweetly. Anytime, Guns. Enough, Alex sighed. Get out there and see what you can find out, both of you. Aye, sir, both enlisted sailors replied. They continued squabbling as they left the office, and Alex watched them go with exasperated fondness. Both predated his tour on Armistice Station, and the longest he'd seen them go without an argument was about an hour. You think the number of Frenchies is important, boss? Steph asked after they left. Might be nothing. Alex shoved his hands in his pockets, studying the polished floor. Armistice Station's janitorial staff was as efficient as everything else in this place. Alex's people didn't even need to take their trash to the incinerator. Steph chewed on another pen. Don't they usually ask us for help with getting stores since they don't have a team here? Yeah, they do. Alex rubbed his chin. He hurried through shaving that morning, and it showed. They must have hired a local husbanding agent. Pity we can't wander up and ask those French sub guys we ran into yesterday, she said. If you're implying that them being here plus a boatload of Marines is weird, your point is taken. Alex frowned. Something's up. You think we should tell the Admiral, sir? Maybe later. Alex wanted more information. Hamilton wouldn't take guesses well. She didn't like people working outside regulations, and Alex preferred to avoid another tongue-lashing. She'd already ruined his career. He'd keep his dignity, thanks. Dismissing one's summit partner like a small child was frowned upon. Not that Freddie Hamilton knew much about children, but she suspected most 4-year-olds were more mature than Undersecretary Martin Fowler. Certainly more knowledgeable than the Peacock. Listening to Fowler carry on about the growing tension in the Indian Ocean gave her a headache. They'll stop shooting. No one wants to take on the U.S. Navy, he said over lunch. Freddie wished the bastard hadn't somehow reserved a table at the Blue Mod. Freddie had never been to Armistice Station before, but even she knew the Blue Mod was one of the top 10 restaurants in the world. The wait list was weeks long, some said months, and the food annoyingly good. The decor was underwater mountains, and the plates were edged in silver. This place knew it was amazing. Fowler's table for 4 included Freddie and both their aides. Luckily, Mr. Gage and Lieutenant Commander Maria Vasquez got along better than the Admiral and the Secretary, generally steering the conversation away from touchy topics. Fowler sent poor Lieutenant Lynn off to find some present for his wife, rather than inviting him to lunch, a task the lieutenant accepted with surprising aplomb. Freddie supposed it wasn't too much of an abuse of power, and besides, she felt sorry for Lynn, who clearly wanted to give Fowler a wide berth. "I'm glad you're confident in our abilities, Mr. Secretary, but I'm not sure the Indians share your awe," she said, putting her fork down. "They wouldn't have shot at us otherwise." Fowler waved a hand. "It's posturing. Their team wants something, probably Diego Garcia. We'll give them less than they ask for, of course." "Shooting missiles isn't posturing." Freddie's eyes narrowed. 19 American sailors are dead and another 40 are injured. 2 destroyers will need a shipyard to fix them. If that's not an act of war, I don't know what is. "Only if diplomacy breaks down," he said. "We'll fix that here. Don't worry your little head, Admiral." Freddie hadn't burned so much to smack sense into a man since her first department head told her she'd never qualify as a submariner because she had boobs. But she wasn't a hot-headed junior lieutenant these days, so she held her tongue. "Correct me if I'm wrong, but arrogance rarely makes international friends." "Well, if anyone's to blame for the current situation, it's the Navy." "Excuse me?" "The Kansas incident started this mess." Fowler smirked. "Weren't you responsible for that investigation?" "I was." "Well, the Indians and their allies, France and Russia among others, in case I have to remind you, are still unhappy. I expect it to come up this afternoon when we argue about the shooting at Diego Garcia. Nearly as many people died on that Nake your Navy claims it didn't sink." "Kansas didn't sink the Nake," Freddie snapped before she could stop herself. "So you say, but we all know how the military loves its secrets, don't we?" Fowler hummed under his breath, giving her a knowing look as he sipped some frou-frou hot tea. "The international investigation disagrees." "The international investigation determined, just as I did, that Kansas's torpedo room was just as full after the shooting as it was before it." Freddie sucked in a deep breath. "Kansas didn't fire those torpedoes." She wasn't sure if Kansas would have. Chris Kennedy checked every box in his career thus far. He wasn't an idiot, and she didn't think he wanted to shoot civilians. His former XO, on the other hand, was the kind of unpredictable individual Freddie hated. And now I'm saddled with him here. Heaven help them all if Coleman disobeyed orders he didn't like and endangered this entire summit. Fowler laughed. "And I'm sure the Navy's never snuck torpedoes into a submarine." "Do you have any idea how big a Mark 48 Seabass torpedo is?" "They're 19 feet long. Hard to sneak around," Freddie said. "They also weigh about 3,500 pounds, Mr. Secretary," Maria added, her dark eyes unreadable. "Torpedoes aren't something you can tuck in the back of a truck and hand to a sub. You need a crane." "As fascinating as your torpedo trivia is, I'm only telling you what our friends in this region are saying," Fowler replied. "The truth doesn't matter. We have to deal with the politics of the situation. Or I do. It'll be better if you keep your mouth shut." "I'll do my job, Mr. Secretary." Freddie couldn't handle this conversation any longer. She'd skipped dessert. "Speaking of which, will you excuse us? Maria and I have some background information on local navies to cover." "Enjoy." Fowler waved them off, and Maria put her tea down to follow Freddie. They walked out into Armistice Station's busy cook tube, conspicuous in their uniforms against a civilian crowd. A few people paused to glare, but Freddie ignored that. She couldn't waste energy on angry civilians. "He's a piece of work, ma'am," Maria said after the door to the blue mod closed. "The glories of government service," Freddie chuckled. "Ours is not to reason why, right?" "You say so, Admiral." Freddie chuckled. Maria was her second aide since putting on stars, and by far the best. An admiral's aide was responsible for the care and feeding of their admiral, and a myriad of other odd jobs. Maria could rattle off information like an encyclopedia, talk a hotel into changing their room to somewhere away from the spring break crowd, and select a great wine to go with dinner. She was also good at smoothing over rough edges left behind by Freddie's whirlwind of efficiency, and overall, made her admiral appear friendlier than she was. Oh, Freddie was no rebel. She walked a careful line in her career, from commissioning in 2009 to being the first female submariner to put on admiral stars. She graduated from the Naval Academy before the Navy grew comfortable with women in submarines, but Freddie never put a foot wrong. She was the first of her class to earn her submarine warfare pin, the top of her class at sub school, and the first woman to command a fast attack submarine. Most submariners commanded one submarine if they were lucky. Freddie earned her second, commanding a ballistic missile submarine instead of a tender as a captain. That boomer, USS Columbia, taught Freddie patience. She needed it today. Let's get to work. The Indian team has a few naval officers along for the ride. Maybe we can talk sense with them. Maria fidgeted. They sent an admiral and no politicians. Not exactly what you do if you want to make a difference. Well, unless you want to be like our narrow-minded political friend, Freddie started, we'd better— Excuse me, Admiral? Another voice interrupted. Freddie turned to find Stephanie Gomez approaching. Commander? I'm sorry for interrupting, ma'am, but I thought you might want to know that a French frigate arrived early this morning. Bretagne? Thank you, Freddie said. Do you expect them to impact the summit? We're not sure, ma'am, Stephanie sighed. There's also a French attack submarine named Barracuda, and at least 50 French Marines wandering around the station. Is that normal? Maria asked. Stephanie shook her head. No, French traffic here increased in the last few months, but never 2 warships at once. Someone wants to flex their muscles. Freddie chewed on the news for a moment. She remembered Barracuda. More importantly, she remembered the coincidence that put one of France's newest attack subs right on Armistice Station's doorstep, while a French intelligence officer pressed Kansas to shoot a civilian submarine. No one could prove anything, but Winifred Hamilton wasn't born an idiot. France owns 3 major stations in this area, with a stake in 3 others. Maria, ever the encyclopedia, said. Rumor says they're building 2 more between Réunion and Port Louis. It's not a rumor, Steph said. Both contracting companies are basing out of here to build them. The companies building them are Indian. Freddie cocked her head. Have you reported this? Stephanie flushed. We thought it was common knowledge, ma'am. It's no secret on the station. Work started 5 months ago. Freddie wouldn't yell at the messenger. She couldn't even yell at Coleman, no matter how much she wanted to. The sub-community's least favorite son arrived on Armistice Station 4 months ago, though whichever brainchild thought to send him here was beyond her. She shook herself. Thank you, Commander. I appreciate the update. Glad to help, ma'am. Gomez vanished back into the crowd, leaving Freddie and Maria alone. You think the French are up to something, ma'am? Maria asked. I think we're in a corner of the world where we have zilch for influence, and no one likes us, Freddie scowled. Whatever friends we had abandoned us when that Nake went down. We still don't know who did that, do we? I doubt we ever will. 15. Complications. COS, the CO of Fletcher is on the POTS line for you, the staff officer of the watch said to John. Fletcher? Why? John stood and walked over to the outside phone line on Enterprise's flag bridge. Technology was better on surface ships. His sub had 3 lines for the entire boat, and they only worked when Ciro was shallow enough to communicate with the outside world. And that was better than the boats John grew up on, which needed to be at periscope depth to talk to anyone, assuming you wanted to betray your position to the enemy. Being able to call home from deployment was a novelty, and his wife appreciated it. Janet was ex-Air Force and a veteran of John's 4 submarine deployments, so he didn't have to call her. John just liked to. "Commander Coleman didn't say, sir," the watch officer replied, vacating the seat. "Guess I'll find out." John smiled and plopped into the still warm chair. Some stuff is the same everywhere. Even on an aircraft carrier, space was at a premium. Every seat had its purpose. He lifted the phone and pressed the talk button. "Captain Dalton here. What can I do for you?" Calling himself a captain was still a thrill. John hadn't expected to make the rank early, but he sure hadn't said no. But he was still a junior captain, all things considered. Now that John was the second in command of the entire Enterprise strike group, it was a delicate balance. Both the captains of Enterprise and Bella Wood were senior to him, but he was the Admiral's right hand. One of the less appetizing perks of the job came when destroyer drivers called John with their woes. Because no way was this a social call. Nancy wasn't the type to use an official line for that, not when tensions were high. Or ever, probably. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir, but I wanted to discuss the Admiral's call," Nancy Coleman said from the other end, her voice level and professional. The call quality was good on the carrier. Sublines always featured a side order of clicking and buzzing. "Is there a problem, Nancy?" he asked. "I'm still concerned about Fletcher being on point," she replied. "Our ASW capabilities are less than I'd like." John frowned. Nancy brought the topic up on the last captain's call, but most commanders wouldn't kick their worries upstairs a second time, particularly after the Admiral shut her down. He racked his brain for information about Fletcher and came up blank. "I admit I don't know much about the O'Bannon class. Tell me what your concerns are." "I don't have a tail," Nancy replied, referring to her towed sonar array. "And the dampers connected to my sonar dome have been CAS-repped for months. There's something wrong with the program no contractor can fix, and even before that, they were nothing to write home about." John blinked. "Don't all destroyers have a towed array?" "The early O'Bannons don't. We're scheduled to have one backfitted when we go into the yards next year." "I see." John didn't know much about surface ships, but he knew sonar. Sonar was a submarine's only eyes. A towed sonar array and a sonar dome both listened passively, but the towed array's distance from a sub's or ship's own noise increased its efficacy tenfold. Without a towed array, Fletcher's motion through the water made passive sonar almost useless, especially if her dampers weren't working. "John, I'll fight air battles or any 2 surface ships you point me at, but we can't hear jack at this speed," Nancy said. "I recommend putting John, Finn, or Kidd out front. Tuck us in close to the carrier for air defense and stick one of the destroyers with a tail out front." "I'll talk to the Admiral, Nancy," John replied, and then hesitated. He wouldn't say this to someone else, but I can't promise he'll listen, though. John knew his Admiral could be prickly. He wouldn't like a mere commander questioning his formation choices, which meant John had to bring this up carefully. Hell, given the choice, John would stick the cruiser out front. Nancy and Fletcher handled the last incident with the Indians well, but a more senior captain, like Rosario on Bella Wood, was better suited to deal with those shenanigans. McNally was less likely to shit on Rosario, too. Maybe that tact would work. Fletcher was almost as good at air defense as Bella Wood, and cruisers had towed arrays. They were also bigger and scarier, which might give the Indians pause. Not that the Indians wanted to shoot. No one wanted a war. "Madame Ledoux, it is a pleasure," Captain Jules Rochambeau said in French. Camille stood a half-step behind him and shook Ada Ledoux's hand after Jules released it. "The honor is mine, Monsieur le Capitaine." Ledoux's smile looked strained. "Is your presence here a sign that your government is prepared to act?" "Our government, madame." Jules gave her a sweeping bow. "All is arranged. I'm in command of the expedition." "That is excellent news. Will you wait for the summit to end?" "As soon as your inconvenient guests depart." A thrill ran through him, leaving Jules feeling warm despite the relatively cool air of the station. He found Armistice Station's ventilation system impressive. It was more efficient than Barracuda's. However, the temperature in Ledoux's office was a touch lower than necessary. It suited the woman, he decided with a smile. Perhaps she did that on purpose. As soon as your inconvenient guests depart. What if an agreement is reached? She asked. Jules laughed. The Americans will not bend enough. They do not recognize that their influence in this part of the world is waning while France's grows. They will not give the Indians what they want. But after the Kansas incident, our desire to appease the United States has vanished. I will be glad to be rid of them. Ledoux's eyes gleamed. Even their small naval detachment is onerous. Oui. Jules did not care if the American naval detachment strayed into the crossfire. Yes, his meeting with Commander Alexander Coleman was carefully orchestrated. Camille told him much of Kansas's irritating former executive officer, but Jules found him disappointing. Coleman was perhaps clever, but he lacked the intestinal fortitude to fight. Perhaps he left it on Kansas. Camille certainly found him more impressive than she had Commander Kennedy, drooling fool that he was. Kennedy followed Camille like a dog after a bitch in heat. Coleman was apparently more immune to her wiles, yet he had still failed to beat her. There was a lesson in that. Jules resolved not to trust his second-in-command too closely. At least, not yet. Master Chief Chinadu Casey started counting the days until his transfer the day the Nake 4 sank. He wanted to be chief of the boat for an attack submarine since he joined the Navy 24 years earlier, but the last 6 months were the worst of his career. Even putting aside the fucking Kansas incident, calling it that earned anyone in his vicinity an obscenity-laden rant, Commander Chris Kennedy just wasn't the type of captain a Cobb wanted to work for. You look like you need a drink, Cobb, Lieutenant Sue Grippo said. She stood in the doorway to the tiny cubbyhole Casey called his office, a space just big enough for half a desk and 2 uncomfortable metal chairs. Her smile looked pasted on, exhausted and brittle. 5 or 6 would be better, Nav. He gestured her in. Pull up a chair. Officers didn't come to the Cobb for counseling the way enlisted sailors did. They outranked him. Even the new kids straight out of sub-school. But department heads were usually smart enough to ask for advice. Sue was a frequent visitor. Do I look that bad? She asked. You look like you just went a few rounds with the captain and lost, if you don't mind me saying, ma'am. It only took one for him to knock me out flat, Sue sighed. He doesn't like our new orders. Fuck, Nav, I don't either, Casey snorted. I was looking forward to some nice R&R in Perth before heading home. The way our 6-month deployment became 8 and is fixing to become 10 wears everyone down. I know. Kansas got turned around the moment the Indians picked a fight over Diego Garcia. Then they got to turn circles in the water for a week before the powers that be decided to send them north. Worst part was they'd been a day out of Perth, and Kansas's sailors could pretty much taste the beer and good food waiting for them in Australia. A short meeting with a submarine tender left the boat supplied enough for another month, but that wasn't the same as a Liberty port. He's still all riled up about it? Casey asked. Riled is too mild a word, Master Chief. I think the XO is hiding in her stateroom. Sue slumped in her chair. Captain ripped me a new one about not knowing where to meet up with the Enterprise Strike Group. I didn't care that their ops officer hasn't gotten back to me yet. He's a charmer these days, that's for sure. Casey regretted the words the moment they were out of his mouth. A good Cobb didn't trash-talk officers, especially their captain. He grimaced. Forget I said that, Nav. I heard nothing. Sue's smile grew warmer. We're all tired. Here's hoping we can catch Enterprise, watch her underside for a bit, and then go home. Not that Casey believed that would happen. Trouble brewed in the South China Sea, And guess where Kansas was headed? Not in the direction of home. That's where. If we're lucky, Sue shook her head. Everyone's on edge, Master Chief. Worse than before. Worse than what happened with Commander Coleman, she didn't have to say. Casey knew. Casey still kicked himself over not standing up for Coleman at the old XO's mast. Everyone knew who'd been right in that situation, and the captain shoved the blame off on Coleman anyway. That kind of thing sat badly with the crew, particularly after a captain dared lay his hands on any one of them. It's our job to... The sharp ringing of his phone cut in, and Casey grabbed it. Cobb. Chin, it's Sinelma, Senior Chief Sinelma Sally said over shouting in the background. Get your ass to the mess decks. Engineering and navigation are squaring off, and it's gotten ugly. Fuck. Anyone throw a punch? Not yet. Be right there. This was not what they needed. Casey slammed the phone down and turned to Sue. Up your ass and fly, Nav. Looks like your boys and girls decided to settle some philosophical differences with the engineering department. Shoot me now. Sue led the way to the mess decks, about 50 feet forward of Casey's hidey hole. The passageways between the two were strangely empty, eerily so. Dinner was over and the watch just changed, which should have left plenty of sailors wandering about. Instead, what looked like half of Kansas's crew of 135 tried to cram into the mess decks, squeezed in between tables and spilling out into the passageway. Both doors were open, but clogged with sailors gaping at the ongoing shouting match. And keep your hands off my man, you whore! Electronics technician 3rd Class Gladys Mills pointed an accusing finger at machinist mate 1st Class Mary Gorska. Ain't my fault he realized you ETs fry your brains, Gorska smirked. You got a husband back home, girlie. Back off. You've got to be shitting me, Sue muttered. They're fighting over deployment girlfriends and boyfriends. Ain't gonna stop there, Nav. Casey wished it weren't a fucking prophecy. They've been at it since dinner. Senior Chief Sally slipped between two sailors to join them in the passageway. One of my boys came and got me a few minutes ago. I don't care who's fucking who, another electronics tech said. I want to know when the fuck A-Gang is going to fix the hot water in our goddamn showers. Gorska rounded on him. I keep telling you we're waiting on parts. The tender didn't have the fucking valve and I can't just shit one out, Torres. Then take the part out of the hot water heater in your head and put it in ours, jackass. Fuck you, Gorska crossed her arms. I ain't making every girl on this boat take cold showers because you dickweeds tweaked your heater controls until they burned out the relief valve. Fucking engineers making fucking excuses. Torres made a show of rolling his eyes as the other navigation department sailors around him nodded. Always the same. Come say that to my face, sweetie pie. Gorska lurched toward Torres, her eyes wild. All right, that's enough. Casey shoved through the door, elbowing two sailors out of the way. Calm the fuck down before someone gets hurt. Dunno, Cobb. I kinda like the idea of hurting this idiot. Gorska grinned. Several engineers whooped. You hear that, Cobb? She's threatening me. Simmer the fuck down before I break both your faces, Casey growled. I don't give a good goddamn who started this little chat. It stops now. You're all on the same fucking team, and you'll fucking act like it. Glowers greeted his words, but no one argued. It was nice to be Cobb. However, an explosion like this didn't just creep up on a crew, and Casey knew he needed to address the root cause, lest things grow beyond shouting. I know. We've been extended again, and no one wants to spend another 2 months away from home. Lord knows my old lady's gonna kill my ass when she sees me again, but this is what we all signed up for. In case you've forgotten, 19 of your brothers and sisters were killed 4 days ago. Any of you idiots want to sit out a shooting war when your navy's going into harm's way? Ain't no one gonna start a war, Master Chief, Mills said. No one wants to take us on. You gonna bet on that? Casey planted his fists on his hips. You want to take your cookies and go home because you're so sure no one's gonna take a pot shot at the U.S. Navy? Mills looked away. Casey snorted. It's all well and good to be proud, people. But ain't no one on this boat getting overconfident. Not on my watch. We're here to do a job. Fucking do it. It wasn't the most inspirational speech, but Casey wasn't paid to orate. At least mentioning the Diego Garcia incident reminded everyone they weren't just tearing holes in the ocean for fun. It wouldn't restore morale. Nothing short of a good Liberty port and a deployment end date would do that. But it might take the pot off the burner for a bit. Alex hoped the summit's official start would decrease his anxiety, but 3 hours in, no joy. Admiral Hamilton wasn't going to jump out of the shadows, but he couldn't shake the jitters. "I've got a confession to make, boss," Steph said, walking into the office. Alex smiled wanly, looking up from his tablet. "I might be Catholic, but I'm no priest." "Not that kind," she shrugged. "I told Admiral Hamilton about the French Marines, and about Britannia showing up out of the blue." "You did?" Alex's chest went tight. "You didn't think about clearing this with me first?" "I did," she bit her lip. "I was afraid you'd tell me not to." Alex wanted to shout, but he had enough of leaders who did that. "I might have." He swallowed. "But you did the right thing." "What'd she say?" "She asked if it was normal. I told her it wasn't." "I take it Olsen's bevy of friends hasn't turned up any information about that either?" Alex hated that this job turned him into a backwards marriage of supply officer, intelligence gatherer, and administrative clerk. He wasn't trained for any of this, but his instincts said something was off. Why were there so many French Marines and sailors here? What did they want? For the second time in 5 months, he was at the center of a situation that made no sense. And so was Camille Dubois. And Barracuda. "Nada," Steph said. "Everything's quiet, except for about 500 French sailors and Marines wandering around. They're everywhere now that Britannia has put down Liberty Call." "That's not abnormal." She snorted. "The hairs on the back of your neck are standing up too, aren't they?" "Yeah." Alex stood up and shoved his hands in his pockets. "My drill sergeant used to say, 'You've got instincts for a reason, use 'em.' They still say that when you got to the Wick?" "Loud and proud, sir," Steph grimaced. The Wick was an old nickname for their shared alma mater. They exchanged a loaded look. Norwich graduated unconventional leaders, something Alex had always been proud of, until his independent streak cost him his career while failing to save even a single life. Hell, what did he have to lose? Investigating beat sitting on his ass. "Keep your ear to the ground," he said, "and see if Bradshaw hears anything during his shady wheeling and dealing." "You got it, sir. I'll hit Jesse up, too. Sometimes he picks weird shit up." There were probably 5 excellent reasons for the sudden uptick in French military visitors, all of them innocent. But that niggling feeling in the back of Alex's mind just wouldn't go away. Vice Admiral Adil Kare, Indian Navy, wore a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The last exchange between our navies was professional and polite," he said. "I'm glad to hear that, sir," Freddie said, standing near the ornate table in blue jackets. "I believe everyone regrets the engagement near Diego Garcia." Calling it a battle would imply war. Freddie was no politician, but even she knew that. Just like mentioning that the Indians fired first would win her no friends. They were here to stop a war, not start one. If only she could be sure Kare wanted the same thing. "Of course we do," he replied. "As you know, sometimes the best rules of engagement can be misinterpreted by eager officers." "Are you saying that's what happened?" She cocked her head. Out of all the many ways the U.S. Navy's fucked up in the last half-century, shooting at another nation's navy isn't on the list. No way did she believe some Indian destroyer drivers decided today was the day to lob full salvos of BrahMos anti-ship missiles at American warships. They were lucky only 19 died. "I have not interviewed the captain in question myself, understand, so I can only speculate," Kare said. Understandably, Freddie wanted to roll her eyes. "I believe that if your nation heeds our legitimate territorial concerns, this can end without further bloodshed." Freddie managed not to grimace. Indian diplomats parroted that line all morning in various tones. Regretful, aggressive, sorrowful, and now blandly hopeful. They wanted Diego Garcia. The Brits almost walked out of the room when the Indians used that as an opening position, but Freddie enjoyed Fowler's expression. He looked like he sucked on a spiky lemon. She knew it was coming. Navies didn't shoot by accident, and BrahMos missiles were expensive. "Doesn't the Republic of Mauritius have a better claim?" Freddie asked. She knew Diego Garcia's history. Diego Garcia was the only inhabited island of the Chagos archipelago, part of the British Indian Ocean Territory, or BOIT. The Brits still claimed it, and the U.S. kept a base there, both in defiance of a 2019 United Nations resolution ordering the Brits to decolonize the island. Diego Garcia was the choicest piece of strategic real estate in the Indian Ocean. Was India willing to go to war for it? "Have you not heard?" Carré smiled. "Mauritius joined with us to form La Union pour la Liberté et la Prospérité des Océans Indiens." His French made Freddie blink. "The what? And who is us?" "The Union for the Freedom and Prosperity of the Indian Ocean," Carré replied. "India has allied with France, Russia, Burma, Thailand, Malaysia, and, of course, the Republic of Mauritius to preserve our nation's rights and liberties against any who would threaten them." Freddie stared, feeling cold. Would a senior Indian admiral lie? Glancing left, she saw Fowler standing next to a French diplomat, white-faced and wide-eyed. They waited until they could drop this on us, she realized. The score of smaller nations almost didn't matter. India, France, and Russia were in bed together? A look right revealed Brits looking queasy in their dignified way. The Japanese hadn't shown up, but the Aussies seemed downright offended. Both were talking to 3 Russian representatives who smirked openly. Small wonder why. They had good relations with the Indians before the Kansas incident. The Nake's sinking splintered nations in the region. Few took America's side, but Australia had, and now they were locked out of this so-called union. "This is not how alliances are announced, sir." Fowler glowered at the French ambassador. He claimed to be the count of something or another. "I assure you that our ambassador to your country has notified your government," the Frenchman replied. "Be it as it may, there are international norms for these things." "So you say, monsieur." The French ambassador offered a mocking half-bow before walking away. By the time Freddie turned back to her companion, she realized Carré had also abandoned her. That left her with nothing to do except gravitate towards her least favorite person in the room. "I think we've been played, Mr. Secretary," she whispered. Fowler turned his glare on her. "Tell me something I don't know." "Why don't we skip that and you tell me what this means?" "I don't know." He scowled, wiping hands against his perfect silk trousers. "Not yet. Maybe nothing. They might be trying to intimidate us into leaving Diego Garcia. If Sec State can't get us out of the fight in Taiwan..." "We can't fight on both fronts, and they know it." Freddie wanted to swear. Once, the U.S. Navy prepared to fight 2 major wars plus a regional conflict on the side. Now, they were lucky if they could manage one fight, particularly against a navy as big as China's. Never mind the naval buildups France, India, and Russia executed over the last decade. "That's your problem," Fowler spat. Freddie stopped herself from mentioning how he called himself a naval expert just a few days ago. "It will be if they start shooting." "They won't." Fowler shook his head, and then shook it again. "No one wants a war." "Then why'd they shoot in the first place?" she asked. Fowler had no answer. 16. Contraband. 11 April 2038. "You've got to come pick the shit up. No way am I going to deliver it." Bradshaw crossed his arms. "Do I look stupid?" "Come on, man. It's a Civ-Mar ship. Nobody's going to care." Gunner's Mate Second Class Joe Hines replied. "And we're getting underway tomorrow." Fuck, no, I love my dip, but the Navy's outlawed the stuff, and it's illegal in most states. He wagged a finger in Heinz's face. I'll sell it to you, but I'm not stupid enough to get caught with it. You gotta come grab it this afternoon. Bradshaw knew that ships with combined civilian and Navy crews frequently ignored naval regulations they didn't like, but he wasn't about to get arrested because Heinz felt lazy. Particularly not with how weird things were on the station right now. Bradshaw loved Armistice Station's peculiar cross of lawlessness and innovation, but his usual contacts were quieter than normal, and people seemed to be holding their breath, particularly non-Americans. Come on, I could just go buy it from somewhere on the station if I wanted to do work. Heinz crossed his arms, blue eyes narrowed. Bradshaw laughed. Yeah, sure, that's why you asked me in the first place. You don't want to get caught, and keeping it inside the family gives you protection. Heinz glared, but gave in, just like Bradshaw knew he would. The Navy forbade smoking on ships years ago, but chewing tobacco lasted longer. Even once banned, officers and chiefs mostly turned a blind eye, until the whole goddamn world decided tobacco was evil. Now, dip was hard to buy outside places like Armistice Station, whose management didn't give a flip for what the FDA said about it. You could buy almost anything on Armistice Station, and Bradshaw's racket selling it to passing Americans was profitable. Sometimes other nations, too, which was what made him head to the shiny frigate across the pier from Earhart. Bretagne made Earhart look like a fat old lady. Even if Earhart wasn't a lumpy and slow cargo ship, she entered service in 2008. The American ship was 30 years old, and it showed. Her crew took good care of her. Bradshaw couldn't spot chipping paint or a ton of running rust, but her fueling rigs were a decade out of date, and even her lifeboats looked ancient. The French frigate, on the other hand, was sleek and nasty. She was 11 years younger than Earhart and looked like she'd just left the shipyard. Everything gleamed, from the 76mm Automalara gun up forward to the flight deck back aft. Bretagne was a variant of the Frem multi-purpose frigate, one of the most common classes in Europe. They were tricky customers, faster and better armed than American frigates. Right now, Bretagne was knee-deep in a stores unload. It was the second day of the summit, and the French finally figured out what they needed to buy from the locals. It looked like eggs, fresh fruit, and some frozen meat. Nothing fun like energy drinks or ice cream. Perfect timing. You got anyone who speaks English around? He asked the nearest sailor with enough rank to matter, but not too much. He didn't want the French equivalent of a chief chasing him off. She was cute, short, and glared like he killed her grandmother. Why? My name's Francis Bradshaw, he said, glad he'd changed out of his uniform. I'm a purveyor of hard-to-find items. If you have anyone on board who has certain needs, I can meet them. Her eyes narrowed. We don't want your kind here. Whoa, not that kind of needs. Bradshaw held his hands up. Damn language differences. I'm not a pimp. I meant things, not people. Like tobacco, or goldfish, or whatever it is that's hard to get at home. He smiled. Almost everything's legal here, and I can help you find it. Even drugs, he didn't say. Bradshaw didn't like dealing in the hard stuff, but if she asked, he'd point her at someone who did. Drugs were the one thing he was sure would get him kicked out of the Navy and ruin his sweet gig. Even Commander Coleman couldn't ignore drugs. I don't care what you're selling, she said. Get lost. Hey, I'm just trying to be friendly. You don't want to be friends here. She turned towards him, her expression guarded but less hostile. You understand? No. The French sailor looked left and right before focusing on him again. This station is going to be a bad place to be American. Leave with your ship. Bradshaw blinked, confused until he realized she must have seen him coming off Earhart. It's not my ship, and then go anyway. You'll want to. She bit her lip as someone called to her in French. I can't say more. I have to go. Wait, Bradshaw tried to say, but she hurried away without looking back, grabbing a flat of eggs on her way. "What the hell?" he muttered. No one answered, but several other French sailors shot death glares his way. How the hell did he piss them off? His phone chirped as Alex walked past Green Skies, Armistice Station's premier dive shop. "Need more information on French military on station. WAH," the text read. A moment passed before Alex remembered they'd pre-programmed his number into the phones bought for Admiral Hamilton and Secretary Fowler. WAH stood for Winifred Alice Hamilton. Jesus, his least favorite admiral was texting him. "RGR," he texted back. "GM1, did you find anything else about the French?" He turned to ask Amy Olsen. Olsen accompanied Alex when he paid a visit to Earhart's civilian master. Captain Sabota was uneasy, too, and not because he had to share a pier with a French frigate. But no one knew what to do about the odd sense of impending doom, so Alex headed back towards his office with Olsen in tow. There was a weird feeling in the air, like hundreds of people holding their breath. Even the tourists seemed to notice. They seemed to be spending money like there was no tomorrow. Alex's stomach churned. Or was that just his imagination because Freddie fucking Hamilton was less than a mile away at any given time, and she again held his career in her hands? 4 more years until I can retire. He never expected to look forward to that date. Did his anxiety make him a coward? Alex never questioned his own bravery until Kennedy did. But now he wondered. Maybe he left his nerve back on Kansas. Wasn't that a happy thought? Maybe he needed to retire. Do something bland like teach high school students to march in circles in NJROTC. A friend of mine says a bunch of them came in on motor vessel Empire Conveyor. She's French flagged, but her last stop was in Mauritius, Olsen replied. The IMO database says that Empire Conveyor has room for about 150 passengers in addition to cargo. That's a lot of Marines. Alex fished a hard candy out of his pocket and popped it in his mouth. Chewing something always helped him think. Assuming they're full. Could have brought tourists, too. Olsen glanced up from her phone. Bradshaw's going to try to get their manifest when he hawks his current scam to them. Your newest boyfriend couldn't help with that? Alex asked. Nope. Her smile turned a touch contrite. Sir? Pity. Alex couldn't, and didn't want to, track Olsen's romantic entanglements. He rubbed his temples to try to banish the sudden ache. Hamilton would text again, probably soon. The thought made his chest tight. Think, asshole. Alex let out a breath. That tense anticipation wasn't a product of his imagination. Were there more French speakers around than usual? Armistice Station was the proverbial mixing bowl, with residents from all corners of the world. Most spoke English. It was the top maritime language, but other languages rarely stood out. He opened his mouth to ask Olsen what she thought, when her hand slapped down on his arm. Come on! Olsen pulled Alex toward Lotus's storefront. The display was full of televisions and tablets, every one of which was on the same channel. The BBC has received multiple reports of a series of explosions ripping across mainland China. At last count, 17 government buildings have been bombed, a short anchor wearing glasses said. The background was full of drone-recorded video of burning buildings and people in the streets. The government of Beijing places the blame squarely on terrorists, although no group has thus far taken credit, the anchor continued. The death toll is rising rapidly, with at least 300 reported dead and twice that many injured. This dramatic use of violence comes just as the Chinese Navy is said to be readying for a second amphibious assault on Taiwan, after the first assault was shockingly repulsed by Taiwanese forces just days ago. Sources within the Chinese government claim that the military blames party politicians for reducing the size of the first assault wave. The second assault is said to be much larger, but whether it will be launched after so much destruction is yet to be seen. Alex's jaw dropped, and he blinked several times. He knew the Enterprise strike group was only 2 days away from the Strait of Malacca, A day and a half from there, and they'd be in Taiwan's front yard, ready to help the longtime American allies. But this changed everything. Would China keep fighting? Or might they make peace? And if so, would the Indians and their allies back off? No one wanted to tangle with the American guerrilla alone. Hope stirred in his chest. His phone chirped again. "Get message traffic concerning Chinese terrorist attacks from AME," Hamilton ordered via text. "Need to know what this changes." "Will do," Alex typed back. His hands were clammy and his heart racing. His office lacked a secure computer, so they couldn't receive classified message traffic. But Earhart could. Where was Steph? Alex shot her a message. "Meet me on AME. Need to check traffic." "On my way," she replied, and he tucked his phone back in his pocket to look back at the televisions. They still showed scenes of burned-out buildings and ambulances carrying wounded away. Most of the hits seemed to be in Beijing, and... "Commander, something's weird here," Bradshaw hissed in his ear, making Alex jump. "Jesus, Bradshaw, where the fuck did you come from?" Several people shushed them and glared, so Alex led his miscreant petty officer to the other side of the tube, leaving Olson watching TV. Bradshaw grinned, but then the expression vanished. "Something's wonky with Britann." Bradshaw chewed his lip. "I went to... well, you don't want to know. And I talked to this cute little French petty officer, but what she said wasn't so cute. She said the station was going to be a bad place to be an American, and I should leave." "What?" "She wouldn't say more, but I got this trying to help but shouldn't be vibe from her." Bradshaw shrugged. "Like I said, wonky." "You sure she didn't just want to chase your ass off?" Olson asked, approaching to elbow Bradshaw. "No, I know what that looks like. Happens all the time." Alex looked between his two sailors, and then glanced back at the televisions. Logic told him the two events couldn't be related. But what if they were? Grand conspiracies only happen in movies. He shook his head. Even if the explosions were the work of a nation-state instead of terrorists, France and their allies wouldn't want China knocked out of the fight. They needed the broiling Chinese war to distract the United States. Otherwise, they'd never get what they wanted without a war. But no one wanted war. So none of this made any sense. 17. Countdown. "Do you think these events change anything, Admiral?" Ambassador Magana Batra asked after they were secluded in a private conference room within the Ballard complex. Admiral Carre hesitated, thinking through the day's sessions. The diplomats talked in predictable circles, going back and forth over the ownership of Diego Garcia. The British, Grady colonists, all of them, were irate, and the Americans were hardly better. Despite learning about India's new alliance, the United States acted as if no one would ever dare flout their authority. Somehow, he suspected they had yet to do the math. The American Navy was outnumbered by the Union for the Freedom and Prosperity of the Indian Ocean, or ULP, by almost 3-1. Carre knew the numbers by heart. Successive American politicians' desire to spend military funding on domestic projects downsized the U.S. Navy in the early 2020s, and they'd been slow to drive investment on the ocean floor. The fools let private corporations take the risks under seas and reap the benefits. Thus, while billions in revenue flowed into India, France, and Russia's government coffers, America lagged behind. "No, I do not," he said. "China is vast. Even this amount of damage is something they can absorb, particularly if the culprit turns out to be Taiwan, vice domestic terrorists." "Do you think it will?" Batra arched one sculpted eyebrow. Magana Batra was a small woman, dressed in traditional Indian garb, but she radiated competence and charisma. Unlike the second-rate politicians other nations sent to the Great Summit, India sent one of her finest. Batra's star was rising, and Carre was content to work with her. Being in favor would not hurt his future career prospects one bit. Carre aimed to be the youngest chief of the naval staff in Indian history. He had 6 years left to accomplish that goal. Breaking some American heads along the way would merely make things sweeter. "It would be foolish of them," he replied, "not to mention strategically ineffective. Taiwan was the underdog in their battle with China. That engendered a great deal of sympathy from the international community, more than China wanted to admit. Taiwan would not jeopardize that by targeting civilians." "Foolishness rarely stops people, in my experience," Batra frowned. "Do you think we should ease our position regarding Diego Garcia?" "No, not for a moment." He flashed a smile. "If we continue pressing and America finds itself at war with China, which they will should they persist in supporting Taiwan, something will have to give so that they do not also end up at war with us. It will be Diego Garcia." "And if the British make a fight of it?" Carre laughed. "We could destroy the better part of their navy in an afternoon, Madam Ambassador." "Please do not exaggerate. I am not unschooled in military realities." "With our allies' help, I am not exaggerating," he replied. "I have a healthy respect for the Royal Navy. They have set the standard by which all professional navies must measure themselves for centuries. But they are not the force they once were. The Australians worry me more." "How so?" she asked. "It is my understanding that the Royal Navy still outnumbers the Royal Australian Navy." "Australia is much closer. I would prefer to invite them into our alliance, although I understand the political reasons why we will not." Carre grimaced. "Still, if we could pry them out from between Britain and America's skirts, we could encircle the Indian Ocean with friends." Batra shook her head. "They rebuffed our every attempt. Say what you will, but the Australians are loyal to their former overlords." "Pity." "So your advice is to continue demanding sovereignty of Diego Garcia?" she asked. "Yes, Madam Ambassador. Faced with the might of China, America will need friends, or at least neutral parties at her back. They cannot fight us and China at the same time." Batra nodded. "That fucking Indian destroyer is shadowing us." Captain Ernest Edwards glared at John like it was his fault before shrugging. "I don't like being in Bramos range like this." "If what I read on those things is right, you'd have to be outside 300 nautical miles for that," John snorted. "We're inside Bramos range for half the Indian Navy." "Point." Edwards sat back in the CO's chair on Enterprise's bridge, scowling at the horizon. John stood beside him, marveling at how nice it would be to have a command chair to fight from. Attack subs didn't have space for luxuries. Some of the older ones had tiny fold-down chairs for the captain, but someone forgot to install that in the Zero class. I'd settled for him being out of radar range. "He is being a little rude for a surface ship, isn't he?" John asked. "I keep forgetting you guys assume everyone can see each other up here." "It's easier from the air," Edwards barked out a laugh. "You subtypes just like to hide. Don't throw stones. You sound like you'd like hiding about now." "Stealth's a great gig if you can pull it off, but my fat lady here has one hell of a radar cross-section," Edwards said. "You can't miss us." "Yeah, you're loud, too." John grinned, but his smile faded when one of his staffers approached with a message tablet. "What's up?" "Flash traffic, sir," the young lieutenant said. 19 government buildings got exploded in China. Paycom says get to Taiwan ASAP. "Explosions where?" Edwards demanded, only for one of his own officers to hand the same message over. John scanned it, trying to think through the repercussions as quickly as he could. Nothing good. Nothing at all. "The Admiral see this?" he asked. "Not yet, sir. He's napping." "Wake him up," John ordered. McNally was easygoing about most things, but he'd go ape if someone sat on this. John handed the tablet back and watched the lieutenant scurry off before looking back to Edwards. "Change formation base speed to 30 knots. He hesitated. "The destroyers can manage that, right?" "Yeah, Bella Wood can't get much better, though." Edwards twisted in his chair. Officer of the deck, pass immediate execute. Change formation speed to 30 knots. Officer of the deck, aye. The cruiser's the slowest ship out here, Edwards said in an undertone, one non-surface officer speaking to another. Like all nuclear carrier captains, Edwards was an aviator. In his case, an FA-18 pilot who transitioned to the F-35s later, along with 2 tours as a test pilot. Like John, he spent decades learning one profession before branching out to include surface warfare. You're all crazy slow as far as I'm concerned, John replied, except maybe the carrier. They exchanged grins. Enterprise could outrun her escorts by at least 10 knots. John hadn't asked how fast she was, and was sure it was classified. Hopefully, he wouldn't need to find out. But John's old command, Zero, was faster still. America's newest attack submarines clocked in at over 57 knots in sea trials, 5 better than the builder's best estimate. Not that John ever took Zero up that fast, even for fun. Speed meant noise, and noise was death. Except out here, where people could see you. Then being quiet did no good. John remained on the bridge as Enterprise and her escorts came up in speed, missing the way Zero vibrated under his feet. You could barely feel a thing on Enterprise, even when the seas were rough. John should be grateful. Like many submariners, he got seasick on the surface. But not on a carrier. Carriers were so damned big. "Admiral's on the bridge," a sailor called several minutes later. John turned to greet his boss. "You came up in speed?" McNally asked. "Yes, sir. 30 knots is the best the cruiser can do." "Very well," McNally frowned. "Do we need to update our transit plan?" "I'll redo the time distance for the increase in speed, but it shouldn't change much," John said. Then he remembered his promise to Nancy Coleman. "Except this might be the time to look at the formation itself. Fletcher is way out there by herself, and without a tail, she's never going to pick up enemy submarines." McNally shook his head. "Kansas should meet us on the other side of the Somme. She can lead the formation from there on out. You think that'll make Coleman shut up?" Probably." John tried not to grimace. "She's got legit concerns, sir." "They won't matter once we have Kansas." McNally waved off John's frown. "I'm not worried about subs in the Somme. Who wants to drive through there without surfacing anyway? That's a great way to get run over." "Yeah, it's happened before," John said. The Navy didn't like to advertise it, but American submarines transiting close, but not on, the surface had indeed been run over. Sometimes, and even more embarrassingly, by other U.S. Navy ships. Still, he didn't understand McNally's new casual attitude. 4 days ago, he was on fire over not having an attack sub. Now he didn't think Fletcher would run into enemy subs while on point. Usually, John had a good read on his boss. This gave him whiplash. "All right, let's get down to the flag bridge and look at what's going on in China and what that means to us," McNally said before John could ask. "Lead on, sir." Rummaging through message traffic gave Alex jack shit and nothing. Admiral Hamilton didn't like that. He could feel her glower through the text. But no one had any idea what China would do. Hell, the news gave him more information than classified sources did, which left him watching television in the office and eating candy out of the bowl on the table. The death toll in China was up to 900, thanks to an apartment building that collapsed after the explosions. Every news channel played images of the carnage on repeat, speculating about who did it while China girded for war. "Have you found any useful information, Commander?" a voice demanded from behind him. Alex jumped to his feet, his heart jackrabbiting in his chest. "Admiral." She waved off his formality, glowering. "Has the intelligence community pulled their heads out and analyzed this mess yet?" "No, ma'am." Alex swallowed, glad she didn't seem to blame him. "Don't get cocky, idiot. She still hates you." "Captain Sabota promised to let me know if anything insightful comes in." "Very well," she sighed. They watched the news for several long minutes until Alex could take the silence no more. As an introvert, Alex was usually happy to keep his mouth shut, but sharing a room with Admiral Hamilton gave him the willies. Screwing up his courage, he asked, "How'd the summit go, ma'am?" Brown eyes flicked over to glare at him. "It ended early on account of events," she snarled. "And before that, it was one circle after another. This new Union for the Freedom and Prosperity of the Indian Ocean is marking time until we find out if we're shooting at China or not." "Have the Indians mentioned reparations for those who died on Sam Nunn and Spruance?" "Fat chance. They implied the encounter was our fault, even though logs from both destroyers prove otherwise." Hamilton's frown promised a storm. "What are they playing at?" Alex didn't like politics, and he couldn't understand why someone would want to lie for a living. "They're politicians, Commander," another voice interjected. Alex and Hamilton both turned as Undersecretary Fowler pranced into the room, looking as puffed up as ever. He wore a new suit, this one lighter blue than the last. The second security officer entered the office on his heels, and then stopped just inside the doorway to join his fellow. Neither said anything, but both relaxed. This had to be a pretty cake detail for security pukes. Armistice Station's crime rate was low. The punishment for any infraction was a steep fine or exile from the station. The rare, heinous criminal was sent to their home country, gift-wrapped for trial. "Mr. Secretary," Hamilton didn't quite scowl. Fowler gave Alex a patronizing smile. "I imagine they don't teach you much about politics at the Naval Academy." "I didn't attend the academy, sir." Alex didn't add that he had a degree in national security and strategic studies from the Naval War College, which contained a hefty dose of international relations. He suspected Fowler wouldn't care. "Oh well, of course." Fowler waved a hand, his disdain ratcheting up a notch. "At any rate, our Indian friends, or should I say the entire Freedom Union, have established a firm position. But it won't last. They'll give in time, particularly once things calm down between China and Taiwan." "That doesn't look calm." Alex gestured at the television. "That's what I've been telling him," Hamilton muttered. "It's a speed bump. Sextate will be there tomorrow and we'll work something out," Fowler replied, crossing to Alex's chair and sitting in it without asking. "China's first assault was ruinously expensive for both them and Taiwan. It isn't sensible to continue the fight. It'll cost both sides too much." "Wars aren't usually waged in the name of common sense, Mr. Secretary." Hamilton's tired look said they'd had this argument before. No way was Alex touching it with a 10-foot pole. "I have heard and noted your opinions, Admiral," Fowler snapped. "Don't misunderstand me, Mr. Secretary," the Admiral said. "I hope you are right, but I fear your assessment is overconfident." "I am a student of history," Fowler puffed up again. "I know how this works." Yeah, that sounded like a recipe for disaster. Alex scowled. Who left this guy in charge of America's future, anyway? The next day started like any other at Shanghai Naval Station. Foggy, and with an exhausted fervor born of a country ready to go to war. Almost 5,000 miles from Armistice Station, Shanghai was the largest port in the world, and the People's Liberation Army Navy's largest base. The first fleet to attempt an invasion of Taiwan departed from there, and the second would get underway in 4 hours. The base crawled with personnel, loading stores and weapons onto ships. Shortly after 0900 local time, a squadron of Harbin Z-19 helicopter gunships lifted off. No one blinked. They were too busy to pay attention to a mere dozen helicopters taking off. 10 minutes passed before air controllers realized these aircraft were not on their flight plan. By then, the Z-19s, each carrying 8 HJ-8S air-to-surface missiles, turned away from the northern airfields and south towards the piers. The Z-19s and their weapons were designed decades earlier, but the HJ-8S Hongjian missile still had a good warhead. one designed to target surface ships and submarines. These 12 helicopters carried 96 missiles between them. There were 49 warships in port. 20 were amphibious ships full of People's Liberation Army, PLA infantry, ready for the invasion. 13 destroyers, 9 frigates, and 7 diesel submarines waited with them. The replenishment ships, nuclear submarines, and 2 aircraft carriers, normally stationed in Shanghai, were already underway. But the fleet's slumbering pier side remained powerful. All guarded for an attack coming from the southeast. Taiwan was the current enemy. America was expected soon. No one expected an attack from inland. Not from People's Liberation Army Navy helicopters carrying PLAN weapons. The Z-19s split apart, one helicopter transitioning to hover at the head of every pier. By then, watching sailors' curiosity turned to horror as Hongjian missile boosters ignited and fire filled the morning sky. With an approximate speed of 220 meters per second, there was no time to hide. A few close-in weapons mounts swiveled to meet the threat, but none had time to fire. Another salvo of missiles followed the first, and then another, and another. Within 10 seconds, 49 warships were aflame. Turning, the helicopters vanished into the fog. 18. Through a narrow lens. 12 April 2038. They said God protected fools and mariners. Master Chief Chinedu Casey sure as hell hoped that was true, because his captain needed protection on both fronts. "Why the hell didn't you tell me about that fight on the mess decks?" Kennedy tried to pace in his small cabin, but there wasn't enough room. Casey perched against the table to squeeze out of the way, but it still nearly earned him an elbow to the gut. "Captain, it wasn't a fight. The boys and girls are just on edge. Give them a job to do and they'll be okay," he replied. There was no use saying that he knew Kennedy would overreact. Kennedy was the type who vacillated between wanting to be the cool captain beloved by the crew and a harsh disciplinarian. "That's not your call to make, Cobb." "Begging your pardon, sir, but I'm the chief of the boat. Enlisted morale is my job. Nobody threw anything worse than a few nasty words. They'll get over it." Casey wanted to ask who played rat and went to the captain, but Kennedy wouldn't tell him. The CO, XO, and Cobb were supposed to be a team, but working with Kennedy was like swimming upstream. Sometimes it was possible, but it was always exhausting. Their XO of 4 months, Lieutenant Commander Allison Hunt, was a good sort, but she had Kennedy's number, too. No one survived arguments with the captain. It was better not to start one. Kennedy's glare wanted to melt steel. "I prefer to know what's happening on my boat." "I'll be sure to tell you next time, Captain." Long after the fact. Casey took a breath. "Anything else bothering you? You seem on edge." Enlisted sailors weren't supposed to ask their captains that question, but Master Chiefs were an exception. Casey's primary duties revolved around the enlisted crew, but only an idiot Cobb thought he didn't need to watch the care and feeding of the officers, too. And this CO needed special stroking. Kennedy sat up in his chair, his blue eyes intense. "We've been directed to meet the Enterprise strike group as they exit the Somme," he said. "We'll have to go through the Sunda Strait." "Surfaced? That's not real stealthy." "Of course not. We're almost at war." Casey frowned. "That's going to be a bitch and a half, sir. There's a lot of traffic in there, and the average depth is what, 60-something feet?" "Close enough," Kennedy shrugged. "We'll make it work and surface when we have to. The strike group doesn't have a sub-escort, so I want to transit as fast as possible. 20-plus knots. Better when there's enough water under the keel." 20-plus? Casey's jaw dropped. The Sunda Strait was a 15-mile-wide waterway between Sumatra and Java. The strait was very deep to the west, the direction Kansas would enter from, but sloped upwards as you moved closer to the islands. Kansas's navigational draft was 34 feet, and her sail was taller than that. They usually wanted at least 200 feet under the keel before they submerged. Staying at periscope depth and 60 feet of water was technically possible, but only if you were an idiot. Kansas was sure as shit not going to be the next U.S. sub to run into an underwater mountain. Even worse, 20 knots was faster than a lot of the merchant traffic. Kansas would have to dodge some of those ships to avoid running right up their asses. Or she might get run over by some speed demon. There were no good options here. Just shitty and shit-tacular. "You heard me, Cobb," Kennedy scowled. "I'm not letting another opportunity pass us by. The crew deserves to be remembered for more than just that mess at Armistice Station." Yeah, I can agree with that. Casey didn't say that Kennedy wanted the limelight. They crossed that bridge 4 months ago. "Then let's get to work." Kennedy's glare transformed into a grin as he bounced out the door, heading for control. Casey followed, hoping like hell this opportunity didn't lead to another disaster. The third day of the summit started with a strange feeling in the room. Fowler stole the opportunity to embark on a long speech about old alliances and overcoming prejudice. Freddie tried not to cringe when the French representative laughed. Interestingly, Madame Devereux had a new companion with her today, a French submarine captain. He was good-looking in a Mediterranean way, with a tanned complexion and darker hair and eyes. He looked bored, even more so than Freddie, and his laughing eyes met hers as Fowler pontificated, as if inviting her to share some joke she was sure came at America's expense. Freddie's eyes narrowed. She glared until he shrugged and looked away, saying something to Madame Devereux in an undertone. "Monsieur, every point you have made ignores the Chagos Archipelago's legitimate desire for freedom," Devereux said when Fowler finished. Fowler flushed. "The original inhabitants of the Chagos Archipelago no longer exist, madam. Their descendants abrogated their claim when they departed the islands." Freddie winced. Leave it to Fowler to be stupid enough to bring that up. He ridiculed the simple military mindset, but he really was a believer in might making right, wasn't he? "Departed by force, sir," Admiral Carre jumped in. "We cannot and should not attempt to fix the sins of our forefathers," Fowler sniffed. "In fact—" "Allow me to continue, please," the British representative cut in. Freddie wanted to hug him. "After all, the British Indian Ocean Territory remains an integral part of the United Kingdom." Fowler reddened. Freddie sat back to listen as the argument circled back to the same point for the 14th time. Why did the French and the Indians look pleased to cover the same territory? At this rate, they'd get... A hand landed on her arm, and Freddie turned to look at a white-faced Lieutenant Jesse Lynn. Fowler's escort didn't attend sessions, and the theoretically private meetings weren't to be interrupted. Yet the room was suddenly full of twitchy aides. "Admiral, Mr. Secretary, we've just received reports of an attack on Shanghai Naval Base," Jesse whispered. 49 warships are damaged or sunk." "What?" Freddie felt cold. She couldn't believe her ears. "Yes, ma'am," Jesse shrugged. "Who attacked them?" Fowler demanded. "No one knows yet, sir. Taiwan says it's not them." "Of course it's them," Fowler's voice carried, and heads turned. "What kind of idiot are you?" Jesse flushed. Freddie stood. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure we've all received the same news. May I suggest another recess?" "A splendid idea, Admiral," Carre said, nodding before withdrawing to a side room. The American delegation didn't have a conference room in the Ballard complex, which left them trudging back to the Naval Detachment's offices through Armistice Station's public transport. Freddie nudged Jesse into the front of their group, aware of Fowler glaring at the lieutenant's back. "Don't ever do that again," Fowler snapped. Freddie blinked. Do what? "Speak for our delegation. That is my job." Could a 4-year-old pout more than Fowler? Freddie didn't have kids and wasn't sure. She shrugged, blood boiling. Having an ego was mandatory at their level, but only fools let it get in the way of doing their duty. You seemed occupied with berating Lieutenant Lin. I am not. I think we should continue this discussion in private, don't you, Mr. Secretary? Freddie said. There are ears everywhere. We're being followed by 3 Frenchmen, Maria cut in when Fowler made to respond. Freddie wished she didn't find the way his mouth flopped shut, so damned satisfying. Not having a proper intelligence officer along was an oversight Freddie wished they could correct. Since they couldn't, she used Maria to watch for eavesdroppers. Oh. Fowler was blessedly quiet for the rest of the walk. 3 hours later, Alex would have given his left arm to get the Admiral and the politician out of his office. Even worse, Fowler appropriated his candy bowl, so Alex couldn't even grab some Starburst to make himself feel better. The news provided a non-stop barrage of non-answers, which made everyone in the room cranky. Everyone except Steph, who typed away at her laptop at the conference table, ignoring everyone else. Alex poured himself a 3rd cup of coffee, filling up the Darth Vader mug his first chief gave him on his division officer tour. One of his favorite things about Armistice Station was its 4 exotic coffee shops, all from different countries. Today's blend was from the new Gikaru estate in Kenya, and it was one of Alex's favorites so far. Too bad Fowler and Admiral Hamilton drank most of it with lunch. It was too expensive to buy much more. Hey, boss, I've got something, Steph said without looking up. Fowler glared, but Alex crossed the room to look over her shoulder, sipping his coffee. What's up? Someone's claiming responsibility for the attack. They call themselves the Democratic Republic of China and say that units of the Chinese Army and Navy have defected to them. Say again? Hamilton slammed her coffee cup into the table, spilling its contents. They dribbled into a steaming puddle on the floor next to her foot. No one moved to clean it up. They've uploaded multiple statements online and are offering to hold a press conference in 2 hours. That's going to be all over the news. Steph's eyes flew across the screen. They're claiming to be the legitimate government of China, allied to Taiwan. Sweet Jesus. A chill ripped down Alex's spine. He was no historian, but every naval officer knew the history between China and Taiwan. After the Communists' victory in the Chinese Civil War, the remnants of the democratic government fled to Taiwan. Even today, Taiwan called itself the Republic of China. The People's Republic of China claimed to own Taiwan and spent 80-plus years threatening violent reunification. Now, with a war on, a 3rd Chinese government cropped up? You can say that again, Hamilton swallowed. I need to call for instructions, Fowler said. You can use the secure phone at my desk, Mr. Secretary, Alex said, gesturing. Fowler half stumbled there. Would this mean a 3-way shooting war? No, allied with Taiwan. Alex finally remembered to sip his coffee, his mind working. Meanwhile, Steph pulled up a video of some Chinese naval officer or another. Alex couldn't remember all their rank insignia, but she looked like an admiral. The Democratic Republic of China seeks to represent all of China, the subtitles read as the Chinese admiral spoke. We cannot allow these heinous attacks on our brothers and sisters on the island of Taiwan to continue. We will therefore overthrow the tyrannical government of the Communist Party and reunite China once and for all. This could mean another civil war, Hamilton whispered, walking on wooden legs to stand next to Alex. 2 at the same time? Alex asked. Shit. Outgoing calls aren't working, Fowler snapped, storm clouds coloring his expression again. Really? Alex turned. Try it for yourself if you don't believe me, Fowler scowled. Lieutenant Lin, escort me up to Earhart. I'll use their communications. Jesse gulped, freezing with a sandwich halfway between his plate and mouth. Earhart got underway yesterday, sir. She's not due back until the end of the summit on the 18th. Whose brilliant idea was that? Fowler flopped into a chair at the table, huffing. Staying moored here is expensive. Jesse sounded like he wanted to sink into the floor. Alex knew how he felt. Fine. Fowler turned to glare at Steph. Show me that. Sighing, she slid her laptop across the table to the politician. Meanwhile, Alex dropped back into his own chair, lifting the phone. It wasn't actually a landline. All of Armistice Station's communications lines snaked up from the station along the transplant struts to antennas on the first 4 platforms. This one was as secure as any uncontrolled data line on a civilian station could be, with software that scrambled and unscrambled conversations at either end. Theoretically, anyone tapping into the line would hear only gibberish. There was no dial tone. Alex hung up the phone and tried again. Still, nothing. Frowning, he pulled his cell out. It had no service either. There's no service anywhere, he said. Same here, Jesse said from the desk he shared with Bradshaw. Steph glanced at her phone. Yeah, nothing. Is this normal, Commander? Hamilton asked. No, ma'am. Alex fought the urge to fidget. We've never had service problems here. They brag about that, Steph added, insufferably. Alex's lips twitched into a smile, but Hamilton's frown made it vanish. Is this a case of everyone and their mother trying to call out at the same time, or are we looking at a denial of service attack? The Admiral asked. Alex blinked. Why would someone attack here and leave the internet up? Steph shook her head. I can video call and send email. She twisted to look at Fowler. Do you have Skype at the State Department, Mr. Secretary? I can get you through that way. If she couldn't, Steph would just hack her way in, but there was no reason to say that. Hackers made admirals nervous, and Hamilton hated him enough already. Another 2 hours passed before Fowler reached anyone for updated instructions. During that time, the United Nations Security Council met, voting to condemn the so-called Democratic Republic of China and calling for peace. Taiwanese representatives, not technically members of the UN but allowed to be present, confirmed the existence of this unified Chinese government. The U.S. vetoed the resolution accusing the new DROC of war crimes on the grounds of lack of information on the actual attack. Predictably, the State Department had eyes only for China and didn't care what happened out at the less great than ever summit. Fowler scowled up a storm as he was told to wait and yelled at some poor assistant. Alex watched with growing horror. Was this how World War III started? Nah. We should wait, Admiral Carre said as soon as he walked into Armistice Station's governing complex. This room, called Central, was the command center, the heart of the station. Monitors lined the walls, showing environmental statuses, ships and submarines docked, the number of resident personnel, and more. One could shut down almost any system in the station from here, even the safety protocols. Yet it was the one room on the station without that faint blue tint to the lighting. Central was stark white, as bright as day. Captain Jules Rochambeau appreciated Central's functionality without liking the environment. He preferred soft yellow light, or even red lights, when faced with banks of computers. Jules shrugged. To what end, Monsieur l'Admiral? Our governments are in agreement. There is no reason to delay. Carre scowled. The new developments in China are disturbing. If the United States does not intervene, they will, Jules said. And if they do not, they will not have the strength to interfere. And even if they do, our actions will be non-violent. Simply forceful? Carre laughed without humor. Oui. I envy your confidence. Carre looked annoyed, but what did Jules care? Their plan was solid, if not a match to his original brief. Reduce American influence without bloodshed. The Americans would argue, but they would have no choice. They were too invested in Taiwan to let China take over, and China had too big of a military for this single attack to handicap their navy. Jules did not like the task he was given, But he would see it through. In the end, his nation would benefit. Both their nations would, assuming the Indians didn't get cold feet. The Russian representative absented herself from such discussions, but Jules knew that the Red Bear itched to regain its old prominence. Russia would not object, even if they would not actively participate. Yet. "It is not confidence," he replied. "It is acceptance of reality. In order for our nations to act freely in this area of the world, we must reduce American influence. Their continued interference harms all of our interests." Kare eyed him. "Was the Kansas incident scripted to accomplish that same end, Captain?" Jules met his gaze. "I know not of what you speak." "Of course you do not," Kare chuckled, "because you and your submarine just happened to be present when the Americans faced off with that Nick 4. "Armistice Station has always been a friend to France," Jules replied. "Yes, and your new executive officer was not the liaison whom America has blamed for the misunderstanding." Kare rolled his eyes. "Do not take me for an idiot, Captain. My country is aware of what your nation has done to manipulate events." Jules smiled and spread his hands. "Well, I suppose one ought not to be shy, then." "Indeed." Kare made a face. "Does your country not approve?" Jules asked innocently. Kare huffed. "Our approval does not matter. We are already involved." "Then I am afraid that I am not worried about your tender feelings, Admiral." Jules smiled, showing teeth. "Our nations have agreed that this is my operation, no?" "Yes." The word was a hiss. "Then allow me to show you that France will follow through on our obligations. We will back your play for the Chagos Archipelago. You will support us here." "Of course I will." Kare's expression was no happier, but at least his voice was firm. "I understand my duty, Captain." "Très bien." Jules turned to the third person in the room, who had watched their conversation in silence. "Madame Ludo, can you confirm that the Russian delegation has departed?" "Oui. Their ship left 1 hour ago." "Excellent. Then would you be so kind as to cut off all communications except bridge-to-bridge radio?" "I would be delighted." Ledoux smiled, probably thinking of her growing bank account. Not that Jules minded. Making one wealthy woman richer served France's purposes. They would make the money back within a year. Besides, it would not come out of the Navy's budget, so what did he care? He nodded his thanks. "Merci." "Pas de quoi," she replied, and walked over to the nearest keyboard. 4 keystrokes later, she nodded. "Fini." Jules turned back to Kare. "Now we begin." 19. Calm before the storm. Dinner was pizza delivery, which Admiral Hamilton seemed to find a novel concept on an underwater station. Steph was used to it, though she certainly didn't mind when the detachment's budget stretched to buying food. Pizza Hut tasted great here. It didn't have the different spices the pizza chain used in other countries and tasted just like it did back home. However, pizza didn't help her mood when Fowler appropriated Steph's laptop to keep in touch with the State Department. She had a tablet, sure, but tablets weren't the best for typing. "You been with the Admiral long?" she asked Maria Vasquez. Maria was a submariner, but they were the same rank and she seemed cool. She had to be on the fast track, too, to be Freddie Hamilton's aide. "About a year," Maria shrugged. "She's a good boss." "She's sitting right here, Maria." Hamilton didn't look up from a book on her own tablet, but Steph thought she saw a smile. Maria grinned. "That's why I'm saying nice things, ma'am. I say the terrible stuff for behind your back." Hamilton snorted out a laugh. "Very well." Yeah, she had to be a good admiral to work for if she had a sense of humor. In Steph's experience, they usually didn't, so that said something about Hamilton. "Any of you fine ladies and gentlemen want a beer?" Bradshaw stuck his head in the conference room to ask. Suba and I are headed to the store. Fowler scowled. Aren't you supposed to stay sober while on duty, sailor? With all due respect, Mr. Secretary, I live here, Bradshaw said. It's after working hours. I thought better of you. Fowler directed this at Jesse, who stood behind Bradshaw like he was on the wrong end of the firing line. Sir, Jesse gulped. We could stay, I suppose. Bradshaw glared at his boss. I'll take Olson, sir. We'll be sure to get you something soft and bubbly instead of beer. Bradshaw grabbed Olson by the arm, dragging her out the double doors of the outer office before anyone could object. Fowler watched them like they were lepers. Is this the kind of organization you run, Commander Coleman? He demanded. And that made Admiral Hamilton frown. Did Fowler have to find fault with everything? Steph bit her tongue, watching her boss look up from his computer. Alex had retreated to his desk when Admiral Hamilton stuck around, but it didn't offer much privacy. The individual desks were just cubicles. Sir, my sailors are adults. Alex's voice was deceptively calm, but Steph saw the way his eyes narrowed. I'm not their mother. I don't monitor what they do off-duty, provided it brings no discredit down upon them or the Navy. Fowler glanced at Hamilton for backup, but she focused on her book again. No love lost there, Steph thought. That sounds like a terrible way to represent the United States of America. If you wanted better, you should have sent an ambassador, Alex retorted. Sir. Fowler went purple. You! That's enough, Commander. An edge entered Hamilton's voice, and her brown eyes were cold. Yes, ma'am. Alex looked down again, deflating. Man, Steph burned to know what history lay between those two, but she couldn't ask. Mr. Secretary, can I get you anything? Mr. Gage interjected, clearly used to calming his boss down. Or if you like, I can ship the gift you purchased for your wife. I'd be happy to help, Jesse said. That's a lovely idea. Thank you for being useful, James. Fowler favored his aide with a smile, but no aide who liked his boss would jet out of the office as fast as Gage did. Unfortunately, that left Steph and Maria alone with her boss, the Admiral, and a cranky politician, who continued to monopolize Steph's computer. That didn't stop her from poking around the internet to find more information on the mess in China. Typing without a keyboard was annoying, but Steph's search terms finally led her to a Chinese-language website that her browser dutifully translated. Hey, check this out, she said. I found a Taiwanese news website that just announced that the Taiwanese government confirms their alliance with the Democratic Republic of China. They vowed to bring down the Communist Party and reunite China under the flag of democracy. You hear that from State yet, Mr. Secretary? Hamilton asked. No. Fowler scowled yet again, poking listlessly at Steph's defenseless touchscreen. If he breaks that, I'm going to get the Navy to buy me a new Alienware. Trying to ignore the byplay, Steph clicked another link. Holy shit! Entire ships are defecting to the DROC. There's reports of a pro-democracy mutiny on Liaoning. Are you kidding? Maria's jaw dropped. That's civil war. Show me. Hamilton rose and crossed to her in 3 long strides. Steph handed over the tablet and watched the color drain out of the Admiral's face. Steph knew how she felt. The American-Taiwanese alliance went back decades. Trouble in China and Taiwan meant trouble for the U.S. Conventional wisdom said that Taiwan couldn't win a war without American help, but if they had allies in mainland China, this could change the world. Is anyone going to tell me what the hell Liaoning is? Fowler asked. Hamilton waved a dismissive hand. Chinese aircraft carrier, she swallowed. Fuck. Hong Kong declared independence, and now the links don't work. You think the website's blocked? It shouldn't be, let me see. Steph grabbed the tablet, but Hamilton was right. Clicking on anything just got her an error message. Weird. Entire internet's down, Alex said from his desk. No way! Steph clicked to the Armistice Station homepage. Nothing. Then the overhead loudspeaker crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the inconvenience, but we have a station-wide loss of internet connectivity. Our teams are working diligently to restore internet as soon as possible. The message repeated in 6 languages. Steph chewed her lip, getting up and walking over to where Alex stared at his screen. This seem as weird to you as it does to me, boss? Nah, a loss of cell and wired phones 4 hours ago, coupled with a station-wide internet outage, is normal. Alex snorted. Happens every day. Yeah. She perched on his desk. You want me to call Central and see what I can find out? Alex smiled ruefully. With what phone? Shit. Steph felt like an idiot and snuck a glance at Hamilton to see if she'd heard the gaffe. Should I head down? Not a bad idea. Go ahead. Unfortunately, Steph's great idea was shared by about 1,000 other people, all of whom crammed the tubes near Central. She barely got within sight of the control center before Ada Ledoux turned everyone away, apologizing for the inconvenience and promising to have internet and phones back up as quickly as possible. Steph scowled. If she wanted fluff, she'd read a romance novel. Master Chief Casey was in control when the message came in. As fate would have it, Lieutenant Grippo had the deck, just as she always did when shit went down. Casey felt sorry for the navigator on most days. She was competent and smart, but telling the captain that was a fool's errand. Kennedy started hating Sue way back during the goddamned Kansas incident. Now, Kennedy picked on everything from the clothes she wore on Liberty to the words she used in reports. Check this out, Cobb, Sue said, handing the message tablet over. From Com Sub Pack to USS Kansas SSN 810. Info, Com Subron 29. Subject, redirect to Armistice Station. 1. Armistice Station lost all voice communications at 12:09:35 Zulu, April 38. Internet and VoIP communication lost with Armistice Station at 12:05 Zulu, April 38. 2. Civilian interest is high. Multiple news outlets reporting loss of communications. 3. USNS Amelia Earhart, TAKE 6, has attempted multiple communications with station and has been warned off approaching due to unforeseen mechanical and electrical difficulties. 4. There are an estimated 1,000 American civilians on board Armistice Station. 5. Effective immediately, CAN is detached from ENT CSG. CAN will proceed to Armistice Station at best speed and establish communications. 6. Once on station, report to Com Sub Pack. Fuck me sideways with a rubber mallet. Casey read the message again just to be sure. Captain's going to be pissed. Because we're going back to Armistice Station? Sue asked. Casey barked out a laugh. Because no one's shooting there. Fucking glory hound. They might if they see us, Sue said, looking at the deck. They don't hate us that much. Casey hoped they didn't anyway. Kansas didn't fucking shoot that nag, but he knew what most of the world thought. You don't get online much, do you, Master Chief? Sue's laugh was bitter. I made the mistake of looking up the Kansas incident on Twitter. Twitter's a fucking cesspit, always has been, Casey shrugged. Besides, that's not the point. Point is the captain's gonna go apeshit once he sees we're going back there instead of where the water's hot. You want to be the bearer of bad news, or is it my turn? She asked. I thought I'd take it to the XO and let her have her time in the fire. Casey grinned without humor. She and I can double-team him. Not your job to take another bullet. Lieutenant Commander Hunt wasn't grateful when Casey dropped that turd in her lap. You didn't have to be on Kansas for long before you realized that the captain was willing to twist the boat into a fucking pretzel to get noticed. But she took it in stride. After all, half the XO's job was to make the captain look good. Kennedy just took more effort than average. 10 minutes later, the pair stood outside Kennedy's stateroom, waiting for the captain to get off the shitter. Another 15 minutes passed before he opened the door. We're still 10 hours out from the Sunda Strait. What's Nav fucked up this time? Nothing to do with the navigator, sir, Casey said when Hunt blinked. The XO clearly thought she could redeem Sue in Kennedy's eyes. Casey knew nothing short of a transfer could fix that. Unfortunately, Sue would leave first, which meant Kennedy had a chance to deep six her career. Alas, there were some things even Master Chiefs couldn't fix. Casey needed to focus on the present. Kennedy glowered. Then what the hell are you beating down my door for? We got a new set of operational orders, Captain, Hunt said. She was a tall woman who Kennedy hated looking up at, with bright red hair and freckles. Her glasses made her look like some sort of ultra-athletic nerd, which meant she fit right in with submariners. Casey liked her. She was good at her job, and didn't hold stupid grudges, unlike present company. Straight from Subpack. Give me that! Kennedy snatched the message tablet out of Hunt's hands, making her blink and gaze at him like he was a misbehaving child. Kennedy didn't notice. He just read the message and started swearing. You've gotta be fucking shitting me! Couldn't they find somebody else to go back to that godforsaken place? Guess not, sir. Casey wouldn't gloat, no matter how much he wanted to. Yeah, he was about as excited to go to Armistice Station as he had been for his last prostate exam, but anything that directed Kennedy's ire away from the crew was good. You want I should tell the navigator to plot a new course? The XO can do that, Kennedy snapped. Aye, sir, Hunt said, taking the tablet. I'll get right on it. Hunt departed without a further word, leaving Casey with a still fuming CO. He'd have to thank the XO for that later. Fortunately, it was just a bunch of swearing and posturing. Nothing he hadn't seen before. Nothing he wouldn't see again, either. Captain Jules Rochambeau watched his Marines form up, wearing a faint smile. Commanding Marines was not his forte, but how quickly they followed orders was certainly gratifying. All your officers have their assignments, Commandant Moreau? He asked. Oui, mon capitaine. The young officer beamed. We are ready to do our duty. Make it quick and quiet, mon ami. Jules was warmed by Moreau's enthusiasm for what he felt was an annoying and slightly dirty task, but they did say Marines were simple sorts. Moreau frowned. Should France's glory not be spoken of proudly, Capitaine? We will finally take steps to regain our proper place in the world, and, once it is done, we. Until then, silence and secrecy are our friends, no? Bien sûr. The young Marine's head bobbed. Something in his eager expression made Jules twitch. He pushed his worries aside. France will regain her rightful place, Commandant, but we will do so gently and graciously, so that none can say we did so without honor. Jules waited for another nod. Now, deploy your Marines and find your targets. Quickly.